the go. Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, November 13th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, John Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 404 of Israel's genocide in Gaza as the war on Lebanon expands. Coming up, we'll have a discussion with Craig Mokhiber, an international human rights lawyer and a former senior United Nations official, about major developments at the UN and at the International Criminal Court. We'll also have a discussion on the impact of last week's U.S. elections on Palestine and Lebanon. Asa will give us an update on the story of violent Israeli football fans who rampaged through the streets of Amsterdam. And later on in the program, of course, John will bring us up to date on the resistance news from the battles in northern Gaza and southern Lebanon. But first, here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza and Lebanon. Israel has continued to slaughter, starve, and forcibly displace Palestinians in the northern Gaza Strip as a complete siege on the area continues for the sixth week. Israeli forces carried out a recent series of massacres across Jabalia, Beit Lahia, and Beit Hanun. These massacres included bombing a residential building housing displaced families in Jabalia on Sunday, killing at least 36 Palestinians, including 15 children. In Beit Hanun, the northernmost city in Gaza, Israel has relentlessly bombarded the remaining homes and shelters, with reporters confirming that buildings have been flattened with people still inside, with no advance warning. Journalist Hossam Shabat wrote, quote, "Beit Hanun is my beloved city where I was born and raised. In the early days of the genocide, it was the first city targeted by Israeli occupation forces to be wiped out. It had a population of 70,000. Now only 3,000 are left. Israeli forces have been trying to ethnically cleanse it for over a year now. They just invaded it again, surrounded the remaining schools, and are forcing the residents to leave under the threat of snipers and bombs." Al Jazeera's Hani Mahmoud reported on Tuesday that, quote, "There's a surge in attacks as the Israeli military pushes deeper in its armored vehicles and tanks into the areas in an attempt to force people out of Beit Hanun. For the past months, people in Beit Hanun could not leave the area because the Israeli military was blocking Salah ad-Din Street. As of today, there's a sudden surge in the attacks, with many reports of people killed inside these residential homes. Al Jazeera collected testimonies of Palestinians inside Beit Hanun over the last few days. One resident said, quote, "The Israelis have been wreaking havoc, killing in Beit Hanun all night long, pounding the few buildings still standing, especially those on crossroads. We could not even bury the dead. Many bodies are still buried under the debris. Israeli warplanes, quadcopters, and artillery have been bombarding us all night long. Even snipers were deployed and started gunning down civilians." Over the weekend, Israel delivered a reported 11 trucks of food, water, and medical supplies to the thousands of Palestinians in northern Gaza after more than a month of complete siege. Another eyewitness in Beit Hanun told Al Jazeera that, quote, "Only 2 relief aid trucks entered, one carrying flour, the other carrying canned food. The following day, the Israeli occupation forces stormed the area. They filmed the trucks only for their propaganda. As you see, we were forcibly evacuated, humiliated, and worn out. Rami Abdu of Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated on Monday, Israel allowed a humanitarian aid truck into a shelter in the town of Beit Hanun amidst widespread media coverage. On Tuesday, Abdu adds, Israeli forces stormed the shelter, killed civilians, forcibly displaced the rest, and set the humanitarian aid on fire. Quote, you can imagine every form of brutality, but you will never grasp the full extent of what Israel is doing, Abdu said. Anas al-Sharif and Hossam Shabat, two of the only remaining journalists in northern Gaza who have been put on an assassination list by Israel, confirmed that Palestinians were forced to flee the shelters in Beit Hanun at gunpoint. And they keep reporting while their family members are being killed. Hossam Shabat posted this video of him burying his 11 cousins after an Israeli attack in northern Gaza on Sunday. He writes, quote, during the genocide, the act of burial has become a painful experience that has lost all its traditional meaning. We are forced to quickly bury our loved ones in makeshift graves. Important customs like communal mourning, prayers, and the gentle preparation of bodies have been replaced by a sense of urgency and deep despair. The traditions that once offered comfort and meaning in times of grief are now swallowed by chaos and the relentless sound of bombings, leaving us to mourn in an environment of unbearable sorrow. Israel has continued to attack the remaining hospitals in northern Gaza. At Kamal Adwan Hospital, the director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who, as we reported, had to bury his own child in the hospital courtyard just 2 weeks ago, urgently called for the immediate delivery of essential supplies and ambulance services, in addition to lifting the siege on northern Gaza. In a statement released by the Gaza government media office on Sunday, Dr. Abu Safia said, quote, we have begun to notice the emergence of cases of malnutrition and famine in the area. Northern Gaza is being subjected to a war of extermination, and we are suffering in silence as a result of the crimes committed against us. Our health system and the rights of our people are under severe threat, and we are in dire need of medical support. The crisis in northern Gaza continues, characterized by a systematic attack on our health system, where lives are being lost every day due to a lack of specialized care and resources. It is very unfortunate to receive distressing calls about people trapped under the rubble, and we are unable to help them. Just yesterday, we received reports of children and women trapped in difficult conditions, and today we mourn their loss as martyrs. This reality is unbearable. We are witnessing alarming cases of malnutrition among children and adults, and we are struggling to provide even one meal a day for hospital workers amidst a severe shortage of food and medical supplies. On November 5th, video released by Dr. Abu Safia showed doctors and hospital staff trying to evacuate injured and sick children from the hospital rooms amid Israeli attacks. Reporter Anas al-Sharif stated that those attacks came after Israel directly targeted children in their hospital beds, burned the pharmacy, and destroyed the water tanks.
انزل يا عم انزل تحت انزل على الطابق الاول على الطابق الاول نزلوا الاطفال تحت نزلوا الاطفال تحت انزل يا انزل تحت خلي شوي يا الله قصف متواتر وين الضرب مش عارفين وين طب يلا انزل تحت
That was inside Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia. In central Gaza, Israel carried out attacks in Nuseirat refugee camp, killing at least 9 Palestinians on Tuesday. This followed a series of ground and air attacks that killed at least 20 Palestinians on Monday as Israeli tanks stormed the camp, according to Al Jazeera. Also on Tuesday, Israeli forces killed at least 10 Palestinians in the so-called humanitarian zone in Al-Mawasi, the sand dunes on the southern coast of Gaza, bombing a tent that was a gathering place for people in Al-Mawasi to have coffee and tea. Tents of displaced people were once again bombed by the Israeli army inside the courtyard of Al-Aqsa hospital in Deir Balah on Saturday. At least 2 people were killed and more than 24 injured. The Gaza government media office said that this was the 9th time since October 2023 that tents in the hospital courtyard were targeted. International experts on famine and starvation have warned yet again that starvation is imminent in northern Gaza. Action is needed, quote, within days to avert a catastrophe, according to the head of Oxfam's Food Security and Livelihood Program. He told Al Jazeera that people do not have any essentials for survival, and that, quote, the average number of trucks coming in now is below 50. We used to have 500 trucks per day before October 7th, 2023, so you can imagine the huge needs people have compared to what's coming in. A new alert from the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, stated this week that aid shipments allowed to enter the Gaza Strip are now lower than at any time since October 2023. The report warned of, quote, an imminent and substantial likelihood of famine occurring due to the rapidly deteriorating situation in the Gaza Strip. Access to food continues to deteriorate, with prices of essentials on the black market soaring, the report adds. Cooking gas, for example, rose by 2,612%, diesel by 1,315%, and wood by 250%, it said. Quote, concurrent with the extremely high and increasing prices of essential items has been the total collapse of livelihoods to be able to purchase or barter for food and other basic needs. Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated on Sunday that, quote, given that Israel has blocked the entry of goods and aid to the hundreds of thousands of besieged residents in the northern Gaza Strip for more than 50 days now, the relevant international and UN organizations must formally declare famine in the region. Israel's use of starvation as a weapon is one component of its ongoing genocide in the Strip, which also includes mass killings and forced displacement. Such a declaration, quote, would require the international community to fulfill its moral obligations and take all of the necessary legal actions against Israel, such as punishing it with sanctions, preventing it from receiving weapons, and acting quickly to establish a humanitarian corridor and bring in aid and supplies to prevent thousands of Palestinians from starving to death. Euromed added, quote, since Israel has been committing the crime of starvation and using it as a means to carry out its genocide against the Palestinian people with the goal of eradicating them, the world is accountable for the famine crisis that Israel has caused in the Gaza Strip. Given the likelihood of dozens of deaths among the hungry every day, the international community is cautioned that this crisis is nearing its peak. Meanwhile, a coalition of 8 international aid organizations have warned the Biden-Harris administration that Israel has failed to meet a set of criteria set out by the U.S. itself to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The so-called scorecard published by the aid groups was released on the 30-day deadline for action that the U.S. State Department gave to Israel last month to improve the, quote, deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza. Or it said it would ostensibly be required to invoke a federal law mandating the U.S. to halt assistance to governments who restrict U.S. humanitarian aid. The organizations state, quote, Israel not only failed to meet the U.S. criteria that would indicate support to the humanitarian response, but concurrently took actions that dramatically worsened the situation on the ground, particularly in northern Gaza. That situation is in an even more dire state today than a month ago. They add that, quote, the effectiveness of international diplomatic efforts to alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza hinges on the willingness of the United States and other countries to push Israel to comply with these priorities. Continued non-compliance exacerbates civilian suffering and further undercuts the credibility of international legal frameworks and of U.S. law. The failure to meet humanitarian needs and respect international humanitarian law are already being repeated in Lebanon. Therefore, it is imperative that Israel takes immediate and substantive actions to meet its obligations under international and U.S. law, and that the international community, particularly the United States, holds it accountable for these commitments. On Tuesday, the U.S. State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel said that even though the 30-day deadline is up, the U.S. will not, in fact, limit arms transfers to Israel. Quote, we at this time have not made an assessment that the Israelis are in violation of U.S. law, Patel said, adding that the U.S. has assessed that Israel has made steps to improve, but offered no details. When pressed by reporters, Patel explained, quote, we are not giving Israel a pass. We want to see the totality of the humanitarian situation improve, and we think some of these steps will allow the conditions for that to continue to progress. We'll have more on this later on in the program. Israel has killed more journalists this week, bringing the number of media workers killed since October 2023 to nearly 190, according to the Gaza government media office. On Saturday, siblings Zahra Mohammed Abu Sahil and Ahmed Mohammed Abu Sahil, who both worked for the Media News Network, were killed in an Israeli attack on Gaza City. Journalist Khalid Abu Zir, who worked for a local radio broadcaster, was killed last week, and Mohammed Khares, another reporter, was killed along with his wife, who were killed over the weekend in an Israeli airstrike on a tent west of Nuseirat refugee camp. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of this one by Fida Al-Qadra, profiling Dr. Khalid Al-Ser, a surgeon at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, after he was abducted, arrested, detained, and tortured by Israeli soldiers. We were in touch with Dr. Al-Ser before his violent abduction and played voice messages he recorded for our live stream in February of this year. He was reporting from inside Nasser Hospital as it was being besieged and attacked by Israeli forces. Fida Al-Qadra writes that in late March, Israeli forces stormed Nasser Medical Complex for the second time during this ongoing genocide. Soldiers forced medical staff, including Al-Ser, to evacuate. Buzzing overhead, drones issued commands to leave the building. Despite wearing his white doctor's coat and a stethoscope around his neck, clearly identifying him as a medical professional, Al-Ser was detained. They made us strip our clothes and tied our hands and blindfolded us, he told the Electronic Intifada. It was humiliating, but worse than that, they treated us like criminals. We were just doctors trying to save lives. The soldiers then took Al-Ser and the others to a nearby house, which had been turned into a military command center. There, he said, he and his colleagues endured 5 days of detention under brutal conditions. They didn't give us any food for the first 4 days, Al-Ser said, and on the 4th day in the evening, they brought us a small piece of bread and some cheese, barely enough to stay alive. Throughout the ordeal, the hands of the medical professionals remained tied, their eyes blindfolded, as they were subjected to aggressive interrogations and violent treatment, he recalled. After 5 days of torment, they were thrown into military jeeps, crammed together like sacks of vegetables. They piled us on top of each other, Al-Ser said. We were treated worse than animals, and the soldiers sat on us, mocking and beating us the entire way to the detention facility at Sde Teiman in the Negev desert. The Sde Teiman detention facility, notorious for its brutal treatment of detainees, became Al-Ser's new prison. He described how the prisoners were not only dehumanized, but subjected to continuous physical and psychological abuse. They tied our hands and blindfolded us. We were not allowed to move, speak, or even look sideways. Any small movement resulted in savage beatings, Al-Aqsa said. One of the most harrowing aspects of the imprisonment was the sexual abuse and the use of excessive force against the prisoners, he said. They would beat us mercilessly, targeting sensitive areas of our bodies with truncheons, Al-Aqsa recounted. They even assaulted us sexually, using any means they could to degrade and humiliate us. They sprayed pepper spray on our private parts. It was unspeakable. The treatment was a calculated attempt to break the prisoners physically and mentally. What weighed most heavily on Al-Aqsa during his imprisonment was the uncertainty surrounding his family. I was constantly worried about them, especially since they had been displaced during the war. I heard rumors of military operations near Rafah, where they were staying, and I feared the worst, he said. Upon his unexpected release on September 30th, likely because he was not considered a threat, Al-Aqsa returned to work, determined to continue serving his people despite the trauma he had endured. But when he reunited with his family, they were living in the ruins of their house in Khan Yunis. We are strong and resilient people, he said, reflecting on his experience. This isn't the end. It's a testament. That's from Fida Al-Qadra's feature, Palestinian Surgeon Survives Sde Tayman and Ofer Prison on electronicintifada.net. And turning northwards, Israel has continued to attack and destroy villages in South Lebanon while bombing areas of Beirut. On Tuesday, the Israeli army ordered the residents in 14 South Lebanese villages to flee, and that it intends to launch a military operation in those villages, according to Al Jazeera. The Al Mayadeen news channel reported on Tuesday that Israeli warplanes attacked the southern town of 𝐓𝐡𝐞, killing 7 people, while Israeli missile strikes attacked the towns of Debin, Yatir, and Burj Kana, and other villages in the Tyre or Sur district, and Israeli artillery shelling hit the town of Sheba. Israeli airstrikes on Saturday in Beirut targeted buildings on the Lebanese university campus. Bassam Badran, the university president, told reporters that the institution, quote, will remain resilient in the face of Israeli war machinery. These attacks will not deter it from continuing its mission of education and community service, he added. On Sunday, 23 people, including 7 children, were killed in Israeli attacks on the town of Almat, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. The UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, reported over the weekend that of the more than 3,200 people killed in Lebanon since October 2023, 200 of them were children. And finally, as we always do, we wanted to share videos of people expressing defiance and resilience in the face of Israel's widening campaign of destruction. This video shows Palestinian women making clothes for children using seashells as buttons. And this video shows women making croissants in the wreckage of their home in Gaza. And finally, our contributor, Abu Bakr Abed, uploaded this photo of him interviewing a young boy. The caption reads, "All that matters is hearing from these children and conveying their messages." And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague, Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Welcome back.
Welcome back. It was a long 2 weeks.
Yes, and we're grateful to everyone who did without us for a week. I see lots of messages saying, welcome back. We missed you too, and a lot has happened, and we have a lot ahead of us in this show today,
Yeah.
even after that comprehensive and, as usual, extremely difficult to absorb news from Nora. Thank you, Nora.
Of course. So let's bring on Craig. We're honored to be joined again by Craig Mokhiber. Craig is an international human rights lawyer and former senior United Nations official. He left the UN in October 2023, penning a widely read letter that warned of genocide in Gaza, criticized the international response, and called for a new approach to Palestine and Israel based on equality, human rights, and international law. Craig's most recent appearance on the Electronic Intifada live stream was at the end of February. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but I guess it was. We discussed international law in the context of Israel's genocide in Gaza at a time when more than 25,000 Palestinians had been confirmed killed since October 2023. As of the beginning of this week, that figure has nearly doubled, with the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza having recorded the deaths of 43,600 Palestinians killed in Israeli attacks, a figure that doesn't include the thousands of people missing under the rubble or who have died from disease as a result of Israel's siege, a number that some credible estimates put as high as 200,000. Thank you so much, Craig, for coming back on the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thank you, Nora. Thanks, Ali. Nice to be with you again.
It's our honor. So let's start with major developments at the UN and at the International Criminal Court since you were on the live stream in late February. In May, Karim Khan, the International Criminal Court chief prosecutor, requested arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, Israel's prime minister and recently fired defense minister, as well as 3 Hamas leaders who have since been killed. Those arrest warrants have not yet been issued, and in recent weeks, the ICC judge in charge of approving those warrants suddenly resigned for unspecified health reasons. Also, Karim Khan is facing calls to temporarily step down from his position over allegations of sexual misconduct, while he's being probed by the court's governing body, the Assembly of States Parties. What does all this mean? And is it an indication of potential external meddling that serves to delay serving arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant? And is the International Criminal Court truly an independent judiciary that acts without fear or favor, a court of last resort, as they say, for the world's most vulnerable victims? How do you see what's happening?
Well, it's impossible to see the sequence of events that have occurred in and around the ICC over the course of the last year in particular, and not conclude that there is indeed some serious external meddling taking place. These things are public. We are aware that the United States government very publicly for years has been threatening the court since even before the so-called Hague Invasion Act, where the US Congress passed a law saying that if the ICC were to dare to prosecute an American or any of its allies, that they're authorized to take any measures, including armed force, to liberate the criminal defendant from the ICC. That has only gotten worse over time, and of course that is just added to the revelations in recent months of a decade of threats and intimidation by Mossad and other Israeli intelligence operatives against officials of the ICC to coerce and frighten them out of proceeding on the Palestine file. And, you know, when Karim Khan made the announcement of the request for arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant, he included in that very statement this extraordinary warning that we haven't heard him before, that all attempts to impede, intimidate, or improperly influence the court must cease immediately. He didn't say what those threats were, but of course, people who had been following the court knew what he was talking about. But he also said that they would not hesitate to act under Article 70 of the Rome Statute if these threats continue. And Article 70 empowers the prosecutor and the ICC to actually bring criminal prosecutions against those that try to intimidate or obstruct the court in any way. Then what happened was the court, which is normal in its procedures, set up a sort of pretrial chamber of 3 judges that was headed by a Romanian judge named Iulia Motoc. And just days later after that, we get this revelation in The Guardian and Plus 972 magazine about this decade of interference and threats and really sabotage against the ICC and its prosecutor by the Mossad in an effort to derail any prosecutions of Israelis. Then the court goes silent. And that silence lasts for 5 months, for over 5 months until today, which is very, very unusual to have this kind of a delay in the issuance of warrants that have been requested, particularly when this warrant request was the most cautious, I would say trepidatious warrant request by a prosecutor ever in the history of the court. Karim Khan, who, in my view, has demonstrated that he did not want to issue any arrest warrants, that he was not inclined to do so, but he was compelled to do so by the public attention of the live stream genocide that we've been witnessing. He made the request. He was compelled to make the request. And then we get all of these delays. And then on top of all of that, we suddenly get pro-Israel publications circulating anonymous third-party allegations accusing Karim Khan, the prosecutor, of harassing a female staff member. And that we can talk about that as well. But right after that, a few days later, the presiding judge in the pretrial chamber, Judge 𝐓𝐿, suddenly steps down, and the court cites unspecified health reasons and doesn't provide any other information. And then she's replaced with Judge Betty Holler, who's a Slovenian judge, and her role as the presiding judge is taken over by the French judge, Nicolas Grieux, who now presides over that three-trial chamber. So you have a very significant personnel change in the chamber that's considering whether to issue the warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant that were requested by the prosecutor. And then, a whole chain of public threats by the United States, the Congress, but also the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, and the President himself against the ICC if it proceeds. So there is no question that has been massive interference externally, behind the scenes and publicly, in order to derail the prosecution of these Israeli officials. What we don't know is whether, and I strongly suspect it is, whether the change in personnel in the three-trial chamber was something that was done, whether the so-called health reasons were either caused by or cover for influence that was brought to bear on the presiding judge, 𝐓𝐿, that caused her to step down, and whether the judges that have replaced her, so the French judge taking over as the presiding judge and the Slovenian judge being added to the channel, whether this was done, and I suspect it was, to cause further delays, because the delay acts in the favor of the Israeli defendants in a lot of different ways, not least because it allows further machinations behind the scenes to try to affect what is happening, or whether the change in personnel was done either for real or perceived differences in perspectives on the part of the judges. And I've written that these judges who have effectively now taken over the portfolio, the French judge and the Slovenian judge, have on the public record some at least roots of concern that there might be something substantive going on here. Judge Holler had published an article that I found from 2015, where she makes a very weak argument that complementarity might bar scrutiny of Israel, which has been debunked by down the street in The Hague by the International Court of Justice, but also by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, who said that there's no evidence that the Israelis have any intention or have taken any steps to investigate and prosecute Netanyahu and Gallant. It's not, but the reasoning she gave, she said, quote, Israel in general has a well-functioning legal system headed by a respected Supreme Court. Well, of course, your viewers and others will know that there has been for decades broad international criticism of the Israeli Supreme Court, which was already evident in 2015 when she wrote this article, because it has a long record of approving apartheid policies, state crimes against Palestinians, tolerance of war crimes, activities in the occupied territories, and so on. And there's no evidence that Israel has any intention of prosecuting Netanyahu or Gallant. So, did that affect the decision to assign her to the chamber? We don't know, but there's at least cause to question. And then she also, in that same article, talked about how the ICC is heavily dependent on the support of states parties, including, the dominant Western or European parties, because they can't enforce it without the support of those states. And what I've said is that may be true, but that should play no role in decisions by the judges on the merits. Then you've got this Judge Guillou of France. This guy's entire profile is as a counterterrorism lawyer. That's where he built his career, and that's what brought him to the court. He doesn't come from the human rights side, for example. He served as the chef de cabinet for the Special Tribunal for Lebanon that convicted a Hezbollah member in the assassination of Rafik Hariri. He served as a liaison to the U.S. Justice Department, working on counterterrorism prosecutions at the height of the so-called war on terrorism. And he has argued to try to get international tribunals to prosecute non-state terrorism, which is something that human rights defenders and others are very concerned about, because there is no definition of terrorism in international law. It is, by definition, a political distinction, and it has played a very corrosive role in the protections that are afforded through international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and so on. So that's his profile, and he's now presiding over the chamber, a role that the Romanian judge who stepped down was previously playing. Now, it doesn't mean that these are unethical judges who are going to ignore the facts and the law, but it is not, I've said the law is not a machine where you just sort of feed in the facts and the law and out comes a neutral decision. The opinions and experiences and biases of judges matter in these decisions, and anyone who wanted to affect the way this chamber was operating will have been aware of that when the personnel changes were made. So, then you add to that the pressure campaigns on these judges. And we all remember what happened when Judge Richard Goldstone was heading the UN fact-finding mission on Gaza in 2009, with a group of distinguished jurists and one of the most skilled staffs, expert staffs that a UN commission has ever had, produced this report on Gaza in 2009, and then was the subject of an enormous Israeli pressure campaign behind the scenes and publicly, and a smearing and slander campaign, and he broke under pressure. He essentially recanted the findings of the mission, although he had no power to do so, and everyone else involved in the mission stayed firm. And in the process, this guy who had had this long, storied career as a judge and even a human rights defender, his reputation in international legal and human rights circles was completely destroyed. And I think with it, he as well. And then you've got this allegation against Karim Khan. Now, I've never been a fan of Karim Khan. I think that he was appointed in significant measure because he reassured Western powers that he would not go after Israel, he would not go after the Americans in the Afghanistan case, he would not go after the Brits in the Afghanistan case, and so on. So that was a big part of his predisposition, and explains why you had such a long delay. Well, having been compelled to act by the public screening of the genocide in Palestine, he then did what was principled and what he was required to do. Well, suddenly you get this very tiny anonymous X account, Twitter account, that tweeted this unsubstantiated third-party allegation that Karim Khan had somehow harassed a female staff member. And then the Daily Mail, which people know is this right-wing pro-Israel tabloid in the UK that has been for a long time discredited as just a source of Israeli disinformation. I said that even English Wikipedia had banned it as a source because of its unreliability and fabrications. And if Wikipedia is banning you for being unreliable, that's really saying something. They found, the Daily Mail somehow I mean, were they following this thing of, a few followers on this X account? How did they find this account and then reprint the allegations? And then that was repeated in the usual pattern by all these pro-Israel Western news sites, in the story as well. Now, Khan has denied them. I don't know if there's any truth to them. I'm never surprised when a man in a position of power harasses somebody on his staff, but he has denied them, and he has said they are a part of this campaign of harassment against he and the court for their work on the Palestine file. We also know that the victim, or the alleged victim, never filed any complaint, that the court's independent oversight mechanism consulted her, and neither she nor they decided to proceed with any investigations or charges of any kind. But what we know is that it quickly became fodder for a campaign to delegitimize the prosecutor, the ICC, and the case against the Israeli perpetrators. And you can see this when they actually, some of these Western media outlets ran stories with headlines like "War Crimes Prosecutor Who Charged Netanyahu Accused of Sexual Misconduct." So trying to link, to discredit him in order to link it to this story. There's a lot going on there. I think what is, and I think the court, the judges, the prosecutor, they all know that their reputations are at stake because the world is watching. But for the Israelis and for the Americans, they are also facing a legal risk because, as I said when I started commenting, and I'll finish here, Article 70 of the Rome Statute says that this kind of interference with the work of the court is an international crime, and it grants jurisdiction to the ICC itself to prosecute those crimes. And so they need to be thinking not just about reputation; they need to be thinking about legal claims that I expect, if this continues, will come against them. I don't know, to conclude, whether or not the court will do the right thing, whether it has been so corrupted that it will not do the right thing. But I know that they know that the world is watching. I know that we need to be vigilant. And I know that our vigilance and our attention and our demand for justice has to be louder than the pressure that those judges are receiving in the dark. And I think with that, there is still a choice that belatedly these historic warrants could be issued, and we might see another crack in the wall of impunity that Israel has been enjoying. Sorry, I spoke a long time there, but it's a long story.
Thank you, Craig. That was extraordinarily detailed, and I think you answered a lot of questions that many of us have about what's going on at the ICC. And you pointed out. I mean, it just strikes me listening to you. If this had been, say, Russian interference in the ICC, this would be the top story around the world on The Guardian, the BBC, and so on. But because it's Mossad or Israeli interference, it flies under the radar. And of course, as we've pointed out before, when the ICC prosecutor issued warrants for the arrest of Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, on a rather flimsy charge from my reading, and certainly nothing, even if he were guilty of it, it's nothing even close to what the Israeli leaders are accused of. The judges took just 3 weeks to issue the warrant. We're now coming up on 6 months, and they've done nothing on the request to issue these warrants. But let's turn our attention to another international court. This is the International Court of Justice, also known as the World Court, that also sits in The Hague, but it's a separate body from the International Criminal Court. And in July, they handed down a historic ruling, an advisory opinion, that Israel's prolonged military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is illegal in itself, and they ordered that Israel end its occupation within a year. It's now obviously 4 or 5 months since then, and no moves towards that. But in a piece you wrote for Mondoweiss in July, you wrote that this stunning advisory opinion had dealt a definitive blow to decades of US and Western efforts to situate Israel outside the reach of the rule of law. But we can see that Israel's genocide is only intensifying. Its aggression is now expanding to Lebanon. have UN member states changed their policies towards Israel based on these World Court rulings, this recent one and previous ones upholding Palestinian rights? Or is this bubble of impunity around Israel simply impenetrable, making these decisions merely symbolic? What are you seeing from your perspective as someone who has worked within the international human rights system?
Well, it's not impenetrable. It's formidable, to be sure, because it is underwritten and insured by the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and much of the West. And it is maintained by a fear, a sort of constant campaign of fear against international actors who would challenge that impunity. But it's not impenetrable, and it has been penetrated more in the past year than in previous decades. I think it has been remarkable. And that comes from, if I can say so, from the streets. That comes from ordinary people. That comes from those who are standing up to challenge that impunity, because these international actors would not act without that pressure. That's what's changing everything. And it was extraordinary, because this opinion of the ICJ, which is stating binding international law, what binding international law says, which includes, as you say, not just an end to the occupation, which they found to be entirely unlawful, but a total dismantling of every settlement, a removal of every soldier, a repeal of every applicable law, the removal of the wall, the compensation of Palestinians, the right to return for Palestinians, the declaration that Israel is practicing racial segregation and apartheid, and that the international community has to band together to oppose that apartheid as well, that it has to implement the provisional members of the ICJ in the genocide case. This was a pretty comprehensive decision, and now the General Assembly took up every single line of that in September and adopted an implementing resolution, which is again historic, and which 124 countries, 2/3 of the world, voted in favor, while only 14 voted against. The US, Israel, a few right-wing regimes, and what I call Pacific dependencies of the US. And even Western countries like Spain and Belgium and Ireland, Iceland voted in favor, as well as US allies like Japan, other P5 powers like China and Russia, and almost the entire global South, which is the majority, right? They voted in favor. They committed to this. They greeted its adoption with applause. This was a really important moment of this. And why this is important, we've talked about this before. The past 30 plus years, this could not happen because of the Oslo ruse, this thing that I've called a smokescreen, which was put up to allow further dispossession and settlement activity and violations of international law. We've now returned to a framework of international law. Now, it's not instantaneous. You don't, in the international system, bang a gavel and then that law is implemented. And I think the General Assembly has recognized this, because they set up a series of steps. And by the way, I need to say this every time. None of this is an adequate response to a genocide that continues to unfold in Palestine, and for which immediate relief is needed. None of this will help in that case. What it does is it builds a process by which that impunity can be chipped away in the way that the impunity in South Africa under apartheid was chipped away. So it's important. It's a real paradigm shift. We're moving away from this idea that Palestinians have to negotiate for their rights with their Israeli oppressor and their American oppressor. And the court and the GA have said, no, these are human rights which they can demand immediately. They don't have to negotiate for them. And it is the job of all the other states in the world to use whatever power they have to make this come true. So that is very significant. Now, it is not going to happen immediately. They're waiting for the report from the Secretary General that's going to lay out some options. It's frustrating to see how the international system works sometimes, because it's very incremental and step by step. They have to get the plans in place to establish a mechanism to ensure that Israel pays reparations, which is a part of this, set up this international register of damage that's a part of this, some evidence gathering initiatives. That's the easy part because the evidence has already been gathered by the International Court of Justice, by the UN human rights mechanisms, and others. They have to make proposals on how to ensure criminal accountability, which could include a tribunal, a dedicated tribunal, which would avoid the problem of the reticence and the meddling that's been going on with the ICC and sometimes the ICJ. Convening a conference of high contracting parties to the Geneva Conventions. There's a 6-month deadline for that. Convening an international conference at the UN on Israel's violations of international resolutions. A 3-month report of the Secretary General. All of this is a kind of a step-by-step process over the period of a year, which is again too slow, to move to further, I forget what the exact language is, but further repercussions for the state of Israel. Now, behind the scenes, there is a lot happening. There are a lot of movements between civil society actors and individual member states to bring action on these areas to, for example, reestablish the anti-apartheid mechanisms, to bring more pressure on Israel, to support boycott, divestment, sanctions, all of those sorts of things that help to change the South African situation. And I think all of that, is very important. The current configuration, let me stop there and we can talk about more depending on how you want to focus it.
Well, I wanted to ask a specific question. In the live stream news report that we did before this, we highlighted a warning by international aid organizations that the UN and the UN, that starvation is still being used as a weapon of war, especially in the northern Gaza Strip. Several international human rights groups have called on the UN to formally declare a famine there, which would immediately require that international bodies pursue legal action, as you were saying, against Israel. Can you take us through why it hasn't been declared yet, and what happens when and if it is declared? Does the UN have a way to enforce this requirement against Israel in any way?
I mean, there's no question. Nobody is waiting to declare that starvation is being used as a weapon of war. This is agreed across the humanitarian human rights community and the human rights side of the UN as well. Famine, the international mechanisms are extremely clumsy in declaring, when there is like a full-blown famine. We know people are already starving to death, especially the most vulnerable, the youngest, and so on. So there's no question about that. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that was because there was, Karim Khan looked for the strongest cases that he could bring against the Israelis, and using food as a weapon of war was one of the strongest things that was laid out there. And that is also why the US has dedicated so much resources to trying to create plausible deniability over the starvation tactics of the Israelis. The US State Department spokesperson every day tries to pretend that somehow allowing a trickle of trucks in once in a while proves that they are not using starvation as a weapon of war, because they know that they are very exposed in this regard. So there's no question of that. The clumsiness of the international mechanisms on issuing a single declaration of famine is something that is not new, but they are as close as I've ever seen them in cases like this. I don't think in that case we're looking at intimidation or whatever. I think we're looking at clumsiness. I mean, one of the many lessons learned of this genocide is that the international mechanisms set up to prevent and stop and punish these actions are wholly inadequate, that they have failed absolutely, that in the medium to long term, we may well see justice in the form of accountability for some perpetrators, some redress for some survivors, but we will have paid a horrific price in the loss of the victims who did not survive the genocide and in the decades of suffering that is going to follow this regardless. But the use of food as a weapon of war is beyond question. And I would encourage your viewers to look at the report by the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food at the United Nations, 𝐓𝐡𝐞, who has laid out with tremendous clarity how food has been used as a weapon of war and the crimes that are included in that.
Mm. We're gonna talk more later in the program about the U.S. continuing to cover up for all of this. But Craig, I want to ask you now, again, just drawing on your expertise and your experience at the UN. Back in 2020, the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions National Committee stated that Israeli apartheid would not be addressed unless states that have emerged from the struggle against racist colonial domination lead the way, as they did with the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. Now, the Boycott National Committee is currently calling for the suspension of Israel from the UN and has sent out a letter template that individuals can use to urge the president of the UN General Assembly, who's currently Philemon Yang of Cameroon, urging him to initiate the suspension of Israel. Have former colonized states like Cameroon stepped up, or is there more they can do? Do you think it is a possibility that Israel, which has killed more than 230 UN workers in Gaza since October last year and has repeatedly threatened and deliberately attacked UN peacekeepers in Lebanon in recent months, might be suspended by the UN General Assembly, just as apartheid South Africa was half a century ago? Is that something that could happen?
It is something that could happen. It's not going to be easy, but I believe that it is going to be possible. And you mentioned the Global South, the role of the Global South. Is overwhelmingly the countries of the Global South, without even talking about the people of the Global South, are fully on board and in solidarity with the people of Palestine, including on this demand that Israel be held accountable in the way that South Africa was held accountable. And you see the role that South Africa has played in bringing the genocide case. I mean, the Global South has been there. It's laid out in the voting records in the UN and so on. Now, there are some exceptions. Israel's been working for decades to carve out pieces of the Global South, and has successfully done so in some Latin American countries and in a disturbing number of African countries, by using military aid, intelligence support, some development assistance in some areas, tech, Israeli tech, and so on, to carve out corrupt regimes in the Global South to get them to vote along. You know, the current president of the General Assembly is President Yang, who's the former prime minister of Cameroon. And Cameroon has been one of those states that should be a frontline state, but has actually been complicit with Israel. In some cases, even voting with Israel alone as the only other state besides Israel to vote against a resolution on support to Palestine refugees. And a number of other resolutions as well, where it voted with some other pro-Israel actors. So, you know, Cameroon has not been a principled actor in all of this, and they currently are the president of the GA. Now, this happens because, you know, just to go back a little bit, you know, suspending or expelling a country from the UN under the normal provisions of the Charter requires agreement of the Security Council. And we know the US and the UK will never, ever agree, and they will veto any such effort. So the way they got around this in the South Africa case during apartheid was the US, the UK, and France vetoed the effort to suspend South Africa. They vetoed it in the Security Council. The president of the GA and the majority of the GA then went forward and they said, okay, we don't have the power to do that, but we can suspend their participation in the General Assembly, which is basically the parliament of the body. And the way they did that was when the Credentials Committee was approving participation for each country at the beginning of the session of the General Assembly, they denied that approval to South Africa. They can do the same thing to Israel. Now, that process has already taken place for the current General Assembly. So President Yang, he's not going to be the president of the GA when this happens. It's going to happen in the beginning of the next session. It's going to happen in the fall, in next fall, if it is going to happen. That's when it would happen. And the the head of the credentials committee will also change. Currently, that's Solomon Islands, and some of these Pacific islands have also been co-opted by Israel. But that's going to change. That's going to change as well. And then, most importantly, as I said, you already have the majority. We just had a resolution, I think yesterday or the day before, in this Arab Islamic summit, where they all called for suspending Israel's participation. A lot of G77 members are going to support that. I think that they will have a numerical majority. Now, what will the US, I mean, Israel obviously, but what will the US and the UK do between now and then to try to peel off votes? You can bet they're going to use every carrot and stick, but it's still possible. And I think what is most compelling here is that what they cannot deny is that there has never been a country in the history of the UN that's been more deserving of, as a minimum, of suspension from the General Assembly. Israel has been consistently violating the principles of the Charter since 1948. It's done so since it was admitted, first in carving out the state through genocide and ethnic cleansing, violating the Universal Declaration, the UN Charter, the Genocide Convention. And then even those early resolutions, 181 and 194 that they talk so much about, those are supposed to allow Palestinian right of return. Wasn't allowed, right? Those were supposed to recognize Palestinian sovereignty. That hasn't been allowed by Israel. And today, Israel has the world record for the violation of UN conventions, UN resolutions of the Security Council, General Assembly, the Commission on Human Rights, Human Rights Council, the defiance of applicable ICJ rulings, and the defiance of Security Council resolutions, which is a violation of Article 25 of the UN Charter. It's on trial for genocide. There are arrest warrants for crimes against humanity, against its leaders. It's been found to be perpetrating apartheid. The occupation is illegal. All of that, not to mention transnational terror attacks, foreign assassinations, aggression against half a dozen, or at least 4 or 5 UN member states that are suffering under Israeli aggression. And then here's the thing that they cannot deny in the GA discussions. It has been attacking the United Nations itself. This is unprecedented. It blocks UN investigations. It bans UN personnel. It PNG'd the Secretary General of the UN. It has repeatedly attacked and obstructed UNRWA. It has killed more UN staff than any party in history, more than 230 UN staff in the last year alone, many along with their families. It has detained and tortured countless UN staff. It has attacked and slandered and obstructed the organization and its operations. And as you said, Ali, it has attacked UN peacekeepers in Lebanon, and repeatedly so. It has invaded and pillaged and bombed UN premises, schools, clinics, warehouses, and so on. So there has never been a case in the history of the United Nations where it has been more justified to suspend an actor. They will have a hard time in ignoring this when the discussion comes up. So I think between now and the Credentials Committee that will open in the fall, that the movement, which is a very strong one that's happening now, of civil society actors and member states to suspend Israel, could be successful if we keep at it. And yeah, I'm not ready to give up. If it is not, and I just say this, if Israel is not at least suspended from the General Assembly, the credibility of that institution tanks. Everybody's watching, and it will mean that the idea of suspending or expelling a member from any UN body will be, which is written into the rules of the organization, will become dead letter, and it will be another blow against the international institutions themselves, in this case the UN, which have suffered horrendous collateral damage because of the distortions of the past year. So I am hoping and believing that it is still possible for this actually to occur between now and next fall.
Craig, as you know, the U.S. voted last week to elect Donald Trump to a second term. During his first term, the U.S. froze funding to UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees. The U.S. quit the UN Human Rights Council. Nikki Haley, Washington's envoy at the time, called the body a, quote, cesspool of political bias, largely because of the council's efforts toward ending Israeli impunity. The Biden administration rejoined the Human Rights Council, but we've seen that same administration run constant interference for Israel's genocide by vetoing and otherwise undermining Security Council resolutions ordering a ceasefire in Gaza. It was reported this week that Trump has nominated Elise Stefanik, a member of Congress from New York, who said that saying Intifada amounts to a call for genocide. And Stefanik's going to be his administration's ambassador to the UN now. Following that appointment, you stated on X, also known as Twitter, that other countries send diplomats to serve as UN ambassadors. The US always sends AIPAC-approved Israeli shills. And this time, one who is also an abrasive, bigoted, far-right clown, a fitting pick to represent the rapid decline of the US on the world stage. What do you think a second Trump administration will mean for efforts toward holding Israel accountable to international law at the UN and other international forums?
Do you think my X tweet was too diplomatic? I'm sorry. It's because I've been in the UN so long.
I feel like you were restrained. Yeah.
I mean, it's very much what we expected. And by the way, if you want proof of that tweet, just watch any of the confirmation hearings of UN ambassadors, the one that will come up for Stefanik and any of those previous ambassadors under Democrats and Republicans, and you will see that the main focus of those hearings on the UN ambassador from US members of the Congress are on Israel. It is a process set up to get a strong pledge that you will defend Israel in the United Nations, not the United States, but Israel. So this is very much what we expected. Trump is putting together an administration, comprised of some of the worst characters dredged up from the darkest corners of the U.S. I mean, if you look at the list of names, it's like a hodgepodge of fascist and white nationalist and Zionist and neocons and racist and xenophobes. So we know what to expect from a crowd like this. And it's going to be a dangerous 4 years under Trump. There's no denying it. It'll be dangerous for people here in the U.S., and it'll be dangerous for the people of the world, especially in the Middle East and especially the Palestinian people. I think what you're going to see is more gross and systematic violations of the rights of human rights defenders in this country, for example, those protesting against the genocide. And it will start with them and be most brutal against us. So Trump is a real threat to all of us. But, in the same breath, I have to say, let's not forget, we've just endured a 4-year term under Biden and Harris, in which the administration undid none of Trump's policies on the Middle East from the previous 4 years, illegal annexations, you name it. And it carried out a genocide in Palestine and the crime of aggression across the Middle East. So that was under this Democratic administration. And it was under that administration that we saw this unprecedented, open, brutal repression of human rights defenders in the U.S. on college campuses and workplaces, in the streets, in media spaces, and so on. So we're going to go from genocide abroad and repression at home in the U.S. to more genocide abroad and repression at home in the U.S. on January 20th. It's going to be more of the same. There's a difference because Trump won't waste time on the mendacious pretense of civility and humanitarian concern that was peddled by Biden and Harris, as it murdered babies in their thousands, right? And of course, Trump has to pay back the $100 million check that he got from Marian Adelson. And to do that, he'll probably recognize the annexation of the West Bank and other insane and unlawful moves. And so it will be disgusting, but the de facto annexation was already achieved under Republican and Democratic administrations for decades. And it's been expedited under Biden and Harris in the last few years. And even if that happens, the U.S. saying that it recognizes the annexation of the West Bank has no effect in international law. There's no legal effect at all. The U.S. doesn't have the authority to legalize annexation. It'll just be another statement of one rogue state supporting another rogue state. And I have to say, it's not going to harm the ultimate inevitable outcome in the long term, which is a one-state democratic post-apartheid solution. So there's plenty to fear, but to pretend that we've just gone from a paradise into hell is ignoring the fact that we've just gone from hell into another room in hell. But just to directly answer your question, I think Trump is going to go after the UN in a big way. He's going to go after the ICJ and the ICC in a big way. And we have to make sure that the public demand for justice is louder than the pressure on these institutions. That's our job. But Biden and Harris did the same thing, and every administration going back to 1948, right? Remember that this past year, when these right-wing members of Congress declared that the U.S. must punish the ICC for going after Israeli criminals, Blinken and Sullivan and Biden all publicly agreed and pledged to cooperate in punishing the ICC. That was this Democratic administration. So I just think this disease of violent racism in U.S. foreign policy and racist repression at home is a lot deeper than, 4-year red or blue pigment of the skin. It's a virus that infects every cell of the government. And what it means is that for another 4 years, we have to resist, as we have these 4 years everywhere and always, that when they try to intimidate us, we can't bow down. We have to raise our voices louder. That if we have a demonstration of 100 people and they ban us, we got to come back the next day with 1,000, right? So there wasn't a lot of hope in the last 4 years. There's not a lot of hope in these 4 years, but the degree to which we can find opportunities for progress depends on what we do. We have to be in it for the long game, right? If you think about the Palestinian people who are admired everywhere for their steadfastness, even in a century of oppression, the least we can do is to stand up against this kind of Democrat, Republican duopoly oppression.
Well, Craig, we have another segment where we're going to talk more about this, but it's hard to disagree with your assessment at all that it is going to be more of the same, maybe with different flavoring. But I'm struck I think just before we went live, there was the video of President Biden receiving Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And if you watch the video clip, Biden saying, "Congratulations on your victory and welcome back, Mr. President-elect, former president, you're going to be president again. Welcome back to the White House." All smiles. And this is, 5 minutes ago, they were telling us that Trump is a fascist dictator this is going to be the last election in the history of the United States because Trump is going to ban elections and he's so uniquely dangerous. And here they are smiling and shaking hands in front of the camera and pledging to do everything they can to ensure a smooth transition to the fascist dictatorship that they claim they were opposing. It's, the hypocrisy and mendaciousness is stunning. But Craig, just before we let you go, I'm going to be very unfair because I'm going to put a difficult question to you and ask you to try to address it in a couple of minutes. But you recently said that Israel and its proxies are creating the blueprint for the 21st century by bulldozing the boundaries of acceptable state behavior. If systematic torture, summary executions, massacres, murder of children, doctors, journalists, humanitarians, and all civilians are acceptable, if international law is no longer in effect, if apartheid and genocide are now okay, we're all in trouble. End quote. I mean, my comment is that's an understatement. But can you expand on that? What can those of us who are not in positions of state and institutional power do to resist this? You alluded to some of that, and you said all these responses by states and otherwise are not enough. But where do you see people's energy going that you find hopeful and motivating to keep up this struggle as we have to do?
Well, I mean, I think that the threat is real. I think that, there has been an effort since the Second World War to build up a system in which there was some hope of rule of law at the international level, where you could put the human rights of people at the center of that, where power could be held accountable. It has been a weak, inchoate, inconsistent structure that has been built up over the course of these 80 years since the establishment of the UN. But it has offered a platform for people and nations to try to strengthen that system. It proved to be very important for decolonization in the 1960s and 70s. It proved to be very important for the end of apartheid as well. And now all of that, everything from the prohibition of genocide to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the prohibition of aggression in the UN Charter to the idea of sovereign equality, decolonization, all of that is now at risk. And the front lines are in Palestine for all of that. And all of the forces of colonialism and racism and war are aligned in the West. Yes, they have friends elsewhere, but the ringleaders are in Washington and in London and in Berlin. And so there's an epic struggle going on. One is in Palestine, directly between the Palestinian people and their oppressors, where they are struggling for their own survival and liberation. And then the tentacles of that extend out more broadly at the global level, where we are fighting for an international order in which human rights means something, in which the rule of law means something, in which the sovereign equality means something. All of these ideas after the Second World War, that the genocide in Palestine and its Western underwriting have brought that struggle to a new level, to an existential level. And if Israel gets away with genocide and its other crimes, if it gets away with its attacks on the UN, if the United States and the UK and the Germans get away with their project of impunity, all of that nascent project of a world governed by human rights and the rule of law crumbles. And then it's every person for themselves. Then it is a kind of global conflict that will make World War II look like an argument between two neighbors over a fence. And so we have a lot at stake here. But this is where the hope comes from. The hope comes from the fact that while our corrupted and captured governments have not realized what the stakes are and don't care because their interests are elsewhere, the people of the world have. The people who are most oppressed, the Palestinian people on the front lines, and then those that are standing up to argue against their government's complicity in Germany and the UK and the United States and elsewhere, at risk of police violence, at risk of arrest, at risk of being expelled from the universities, at risk of being slandered as anti-Semites and supporters of terrorism, at risk of family breaches, at every risk, are not only standing up, but their numbers are growing more and more because people have understood. We say this cliche, the first live stream genocide, but it's important, because it means that the New York Times and CNN and Fox News and the governments and these spokespersons for genocide that step up to government podiums, they can't control the narrative anymore. And when you've got Electronic Intifada and other independent media and social media distributing the truth in an age of lies and genocide, that's where the hope comes from. So I think we all have a responsibility to make sure that our voices are heard, that we don't bow to this current status quo and to this and to the power, the mendacity and the brutality of those who are in power, and that we resist this. If Palestine wins, we all win, and we have to make sure that everybody realizes this, because if Palestine loses, that's a dark world that's coming. So we're all in this fight, and we have to win.
Amen to that.
Thank you so much, Craig. We could talk to you for hours, and we'll have you on sooner than, 9 months in between.
No, thank you, Nora and Ali. I mean, what you're doing is so important, and thank you for letting me be a part of it. And
anytime.
All my solidarity. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Craig, again for that. There's so much there that I'm going to go back to, I know, again and again, for that kind of deep analysis on the way that these these revered, vaunted institutions say that they work, but get to cherry pick exactly who gets a pass and who doesn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Craig's insight into the ICC in particular. I mean, everything he said was
Yeah.
really informative, but that was really helpful. That answered a lot of my questions. And
Yeah.
people are rightly skeptical
Yeah.
about whether these institutions really amount to anything at all.
Yeah, completely. Well, speaking of institutions, you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. We want to focus on the institution of the U.S. empire. We now know who won the 2024 elections here in the U.S., but I think one question on many minds since Trump's victory last week is how much Gaza played a role in the Democratic Party's defeat. A lot of attention has been put on Arab American or Muslim American voters, many of whom are particularly concerned about family and friends in Palestine and Lebanon, of course. One place where it appears clear that they made a decisive difference is the battleground state of Michigan, where Trump won by 80,000 votes. We'll also talk about how the incoming Trump administration is starting to shape up. Ali, let's start off with what we know about the impact of the Arab American vote in Michigan.
Yeah, there was a lot of attention on Michigan. It was one of the 7 swing states, and as is well known, it's home to a large Arab American community. One state estimate from 2013 put the Arab American population of Michigan at about 500,000 people, or about 5% of the total population. And 80% live in southeast Michigan in Wayne County, which includes the cities of Detroit, Dearborn Heights, and Hamtramck. According to University of Michigan political studies professor Michael Traugott, he points out that Biden made no public effort to engage with Arab American leaders in Wayne County before he withdrew from the election campaign or afterwards. The Kamala Harris campaign did do some outreach, but mostly in private. At the same time, Traugott notes, Donald Trump made multiple visits to Arab American groups during the general election campaign. He used his daughter Tiffany's father-in-law, Mes'ad Boulos, a Lebanese American, as a surrogate. And the mayors of Hamtramck and Dearborn Heights actually endorsed Trump. Now, did all this make a difference? According to Traugott's analysis, it did. He says that in 2020, the Biden-Harris team won almost 69% of the vote in Dearborn. By contrast, in 2024, Harris got just 36% of the vote. That's half the vote share Biden got 4 years ago. And Jill Stein and the Green Party ended up getting 18%, which is extraordinarily high for a third party historically in the United States. In Dearborn Heights, Trump defeated Harris by 44 to 38%. And again, Jill Stein of the Green Party took 15% of the vote. So that's another huge reversal for the Democrats. Traugott concludes that in the swing state of Michigan, Harris's inability to win over Arab Americans played a small but significant role in allowing Trump to win by 80,618 votes. And here's another fact. According to the exit polls, 4% of Michigan voters said foreign policy was their top issue in deciding how to vote. And that might not sound like much, but remember that Trump's margin of victory was just over 1% in Michigan. So Gaza and Lebanon could have been the decisive difference in that state, if not in others.
Yeah. Well, that's Michigan. What about the rest of the country?
Yeah, it's difficult to know exactly how much Gaza played a role. There's probably a lot of people who stayed home or voted third party in states where the vote between Harris and Trump was not as close as in those swing states or battleground states. But we can take note of the following. Just like in Michigan, 4% of voters nationwide told exit pollsters that foreign policy was their most important issue. That compares with 11% who said their most important concern was immigration and 32% who said it was the economy. Now, Trump talks about immigration more than anything else, even though just 11% of Americans say that that's their top issue. So again, in an election this close, that 4% who put foreign policy first matters. Overall, nationwide, there was a 3% swing from Democrats to Republicans compared with 2020. But it's important to note this was not due to any huge surge in votes for Donald Trump. In 2020, 4 years ago, President Biden won just over 81 million votes, or 51.3% of the total, while Donald Trump won just over 74 million votes. In 2024, Trump did improve his performance somewhat, receiving 75.5 million votes. So he gained over 1 million votes. But the big story is that Kamala Harris received less than 72 million votes. That is almost 10 million fewer votes than Joe Biden received 4 years ago. That was enough to give Trump 50.5% of the total and send him back to the White House. But if Kamala Harris had just matched Biden's performance in 2020, she would be president. Instead, 10 million people who voted for Biden in 2020 just stayed home. We don't know all the reasons why they refused to vote, but a YouGov poll for CBS News in June found that 36% of voters said that the war between Israel and Hamas would be a major factor in how they decided to vote. Not necessarily the only factor, but a major factor. So it's reasonable to think that the Democratic Party-backed genocide was a factor that led many people to stay home and refuse to vote for Kamala Harris or come out and vote third party.
Yeah, 36% is actually quite a big percentage. And it's clear that the Biden-Harris administration didn't think it was important. Ali, what do the exit polls tell us, if anything, about what role U.S. support for Israel specifically played in this year's election?
Yeah, I think this was this exit poll compared with 4 years ago had specific questions because of the current context that you didn't see 4 years ago. And so the exit polls do tell us that among voters who think the US gives too much support for Israel, 67% voted for Harris, while 30% voted for Trump. You can see that here from CNN. Among those who think the US should support Israel even more than it does, 82% voted for Trump. So in summary, it's clear that voters who are more sympathetic to Palestinians still overwhelmingly voted for the Democrats. And that's in line with what polls have shown consistently for years, that the Democratic Party base is far more supportive of Palestine than the party's leaders and big donors. Recall that 59% of Americans want Joe Biden to encourage Israel to decrease or end its military actions in Gaza, according to that same YouGov CBS poll from June. And 61% said the US should stop sending weapons to Israel. That includes 77% of Democrats and nearly 40% of Republicans. But neither party reflects that clear American majority in favor of ending arms transfers to Israel. But you can say that the Republicans are the more democratic party in the sense that they're more in line with their supporters, whereas the Democratic Party leadership goes completely against the wishes and views of its supporters.
Yeah. What can we conclude about the role that Arab American and or Muslim voters played in the election then?
Well, as I just said, this underlines just how undemocratic the Democratic Party is, because they simply refuse to reflect the views on the question of the party, the views of their supporters. And it's also important to remember that it is not just Arab Americans or Muslims who consider genocide to be a red line. However, I think it does show that Arab Americans and Muslims can play a potentially decisive role in national politics in the United States, but it is not by unconditionally tying themselves to a Democratic Party whose leaders and donor class despise them and are willing to commit genocide against their families. Remember that the Democratic Party refused even to put a token Palestinian on stage at the Democratic National Convention last summer. You'll remember, Nora, that we spoke to Hatem Aboudiya about that back in August. Even if, and they refused even when the Uncommitted movement made clear that that Palestinian was going to make no specific demands and just sing Kamala Harris's praises and endorse her. So what we've learned is that Arab American and Muslim communities can be influential by standing up and saying, do not take us for granted. We're willing to make you lose when you attack our fundamental rights and interests. Of course, we're now going to have Donald Trump as president, and that does not necessarily mean any immediate improvement, but at least some former Democratic voters have shown they're willing to make the party pay a price for its crimes. Many will hope that this will cause some reflection that the Democratic Party cannot continue to treat its own supporters with such utter contempt and continue to be reelected. I'm sure that many others will think that the Democrats are simply hopeless and unreformable, but we will see.
We'll see. Well, can we expect them to do anything different in their last 2 months before handing over the White House to Donald Trump on January 20th? I mean, they just proved that this, arbitrary 30-day, so-called deadline to get Israel to shape up its humanitarian aid response in Gaza, that passed, and Blinken and the entire State Department spokesperson department were like,
I actually have a clip of that I'm going to show you. Yeah, so good. Of course, before we even talk about Trump, what Trump might do, let's remember that for the next 2 months and a bit, Joe Biden is still the president and Kamala Harris is still the vice president. So even though they are lame ducks, they still have enormous power that they could use to stop this genocide if they wanted to do that. And
I mean, she keeps saying that she's, what happens to working tirelessly around the clock for a ceasefire? I mean, is she still going to do that?
Well,
2 months.
Well, let's find out. But so far, they've shown no sign that they're going to do that. I mean, they have said the war in Gaza should end, but, as you say,
to them, end means surrender and a quiet death. That's it.
Right. So, but as you pointed out, Nora, on October 13th, so exactly a month ago, Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin issued that joint letter demanding that Israel make concrete progress within 30 days to reverse the catastrophic humanitarian situation caused by Israel's deliberate policy of starving the population in Gaza. You'll also recall that a few weeks ago on this live stream, we talked with Layla Al-Arian about how the US government knowingly covered up how Israel is blocking humanitarian aid to people in Gaza, because admitting this fact would trigger that provision in US law that prohibits military assistance to any foreign government that obstructs US humanitarian aid. And as we heard in your news brief, 8 international humanitarian organizations, including Oxfam, Save the Children, and Refugees International, issued that report just a couple of days ago, finding that during this 30-day period, Israel's actions failed to meet any of the specific criteria set out in the US letter. So, and in fact, they find that over the last 30 days, Israel took actions that dramatically worsened the situation on the ground, particularly in northern Gaza. So by law, under Section 620I of the U.S. Foreign Assistance Act, the U.S. is required to halt all arms transfers to Israel. That's a legal requirement. But the Joe Biden-Kamala Harris administration has decided to ignore its own 30-day deadline. The State Department confirmed that there will be no consequences for Israel failing to meet the conditions set out in US law and in that October 30th letter. Let's look at this brief clip of Associated Press correspondent Matt Lee sparring with State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel at the press briefing on Tuesday, November 12th, the day the 30-day deadline set by the United States expired.
All right, so essentially, there isn't going to be any consequence for Israel not meeting the.
I certainly don't have a change in U.S. policy to announce today, Matt, but as you just heard me say, we are constantly going to assess the circumstances on the ground. We are looking for some of these steps that we've made. We want to make sure that they are sustained and expanded upon, and certainly if we don't see that, if we don't continue to see steps in the appropriate direction, we certainly will enforce U.S. law.
Yeah,
There's no doubt about it.
But you guys were the ones that gave them the 30-day deadline. It's hard to see your answers today, such as they are, as anything other than kind of giving them a pass for not meeting the criteria that were laid out in the letter.
Yeah, and that actually is a much longer exchange, but I just wanted to show that short clip. And you know how bad things are when even the CNN correspondent is challenging the State Department over this. And if you watch the whole briefing, you'll see even CNN standing up to the government on this. But even with the election behind them, the Democrats are doubling down on their commitment to seeing this genocide through until the very end. And I just have to wonder how anyone could believe that if Kamala Harris had been elected, that she would do anything different. There is nothing at stake for them now. They lost the election. They could do the right thing if they wanted to, but they don't want to. Starving and killing Palestinians is not just political expediency for the Democrats. It's a labor of love. They're doing it because they're deeply committed to genocide.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's hard we don't want to speculate, and it's hard to predict anything, especially when it comes to Trump and the people that he's picking for his administration. But given the trajectory of this genocide authored by the Democratic Party, are things likely to be any different under Trump that you can see?
Well, Trump is an opportunist with no fixed principles, and that makes him unpredictable. You could paint scenarios that are hopeful, like maybe Trump will want this all wrapped up before he takes office. Maybe he'll get on the phone with Netanyahu and say, look, if you want our support, end this before I take over. But I don't have any basis to believe that. It's just, wouldn't it be wonderful if that happened? During the campaign, he sent mixed signals, both of very strong support to Israel and its lobby, and also telling Arab Americans that he was the one that was going to bring peace. Maybe he means both of them and he thinks both are possible, but there are some hard facts we can't ignore. Trump's campaign, and Craig Mokhiber just made reference to this, received $100 million from Miriam Adelson, the pro-Israel, pro-genocide extremist who inherited the casino fortune of her late husband, Sheldon Adelson. But this is really canceled out. I mean, a lot of people focus on this, but to me, it's canceled out by the fact that the Biden and Harris administration are also very reliant on pro-Israel mega donors. Here, for example, is an article from Israel's Haaretz newspaper from May highlighting the many so-called Jewish mega donors bankrolling the Democrats. They are overwhelmingly strongly pro-Israel, and the most generous of them, Hollywood billionaire Haim Saban, notoriously said a few years ago, and I quote, "I'm a one-issue guy, and my issue is Israel."
I remember that. What about Trump's early appointments? What does this signal? What does this tell us about the nature of this administration that's coming back to the White House?
They don't show that there's going to be any difference from Biden in terms of substance, but we're likely to see a more direct style Whereas the Democrats try to play down their anti-Palestinian extremism, Republicans play it up. On the one hand, Trump ruled out inviting Mike Pompeo, who was Secretary of State in the first Trump administration, and Nikki Haley, who was his UN ambassador, into his next administration. Both are, of course, extremely anti-Palestinian, hawkish, neoconservative warmongers. This tweet from Donald Trump Jr., the president-elect's son, has attracted a lot of attention. Don Jr. is responding to a podcaster called Dave Smith, who writes, quote, "The Stop Pompeo movement is great, but it's not enough. Right now, we need maximum pressure to keep all neocons and war hawks out of the Trump administration. They've had their time at the table and brought nothing but disaster to the world and this country." That's a sentiment I certainly agree with. And so does Don Jr., who responded, agreed 100%, I'm on it. So the implication is that Donald Trump Jr. is exerting a lot of influence to try to keep war hawks out of his father's administration. However, the reality is that neocon war hawks and Israel lobbyists are largely the same group of people. So it would be impossible to keep neocon war hawks out of the administration while letting Israel lobbyists in. And the appointments announced by Trump so far show absolutely no effort to keep either out. Trump has announced Elise Stefanik, an ultra anti-Palestinian congresswoman from New York, as his next UN ambassador. As a member of Congress, you'll remember that she led the attacks against American universities for not doing enough to suppress speech in support of Palestinian rights. He also named or nominated former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, a fanatical Christian Zionist and Israel lobbyist, as the next U.S. ambassador to Israel. Let's take a look at Mike Huckabee speaking in favor of Israel annexing the occupied West Bank. And I believe this clip is labeled as being from 2017, so just a few years ago.
My feelings personally, and I'm speaking only as a person, I think Israel would only be acting on the property it already owns. I think Israel has title deed to Judea and Samaria. There are certain words I refuse to use. There is no such thing as a West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. There's no such thing as a settlement. They're communities, they're neighborhoods, they're cities. There's no such thing as an occupation.
A sentient meatball.
Right. So not only does Huckabee not believe in the occupation or the West Bank, but he also said in 2008, and I'm quoting here, he said, "There's really no such thing as a Palestinian." So he doesn't believe in the existence of Palestinians either. And in that same speech, he said that if there was going to be a Palestinian state, it should be in Syria, Jordan, or Egypt. And those are views that he's repeated since then. And in a new interview that I just saw news of circulating this morning, Huckabee told Israeli Army Radio that there is a chance Israel might be able to annex the West Bank during Trump's second term. So that's that so far. But the more senior appointments, remember, these ambassadors, they're not policymakers. They may have some influence, but they're not the policymakers. The policymaking positions so far are no better. Trump has already named Republican Congressman Mike Waltz from Florida as his national security advisor. Waltz is extremely hostile towards China and fanatically pro-Israel and pro-war. Trump has also nominated Fox News host Pete Hegseth as defense secretary, which is extraordinary. This is a TV host who he's going to put in charge of the $1 trillion US military. Hegseth is another anti-Iran hawk and pro-Israel fanatic. And here's a clip of him interviewing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in March. Hegseth actually tweeted this clip out along with the words, "Israel needs our support." Let's take a look.
As Israel still fights to defend itself from the brutal military attack on their country, when more than 1,200 Israelis were murdered, and still Hamas holds more than 100 hostage. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu joins us live from Jerusalem with an update. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for being with us. The calls for a ceasefire at this point are extortion. The other, on behalf of Hamas.
Yeah, I'm not going to subject you to Netanyahu, but I just wanted you to hear how Hegseth framed calls for a ceasefire as extortion of Israel. And in other Fox News commentaries, he explicitly refers to both Gaza and the West Bank as part of the, quote, state of Israel. And here's another really extraordinary clip of Pete Hegseth speaking to a group called Young Israel a few years ago. I couldn't figure out if this was in 2018 or 2019 because he's apparently spoken to this group more than once.
Anyone that wants to take the stage and talk about dual loyalty is dead wrong. What this organization represents, what Western civilization represents today, is an understanding that Zionism and Americanism are the front lines of Western civilization and freedom in our world today.
There you have it, Zionism and Americanism.
I mean, he's not wrong.
Well, they're the front lines of something, but
front lines of something. Zionism and Americanism. No. They're on the front lines of what they decree is what he said, Western civilization.
Yeah. And then the other big appointment is Trump has named his former director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, as head of the CIA. Ratcliffe has accused Iran of committing what he calls acts of war against the United States by allegedly hacking Trump campaign emails and supposedly plotting to assassinate Trump. I've seen nothing that suggests those things are true. But here's a clip of him on Fox News accusing the Democrats of being too soft towards Tehran and calling for the United States and Israel to carry out joint military attacks on Iran. Again, this guy is going to be the head of the CIA.
Election, but that it really reveals the failed strategy of the Democrats over the last 10 years in dealing with Iran. You know, the famous Obama doctrine, which was that, look, we can deter Iran diplomatically and it won't come at the expense of Israel. Well, Barack Obama was wrong. He misunderstood the lethality and the evil nature of the Iranian regime. And what Israel has done is essentially employ the Trump doctrine, a maximum pressure campaign, understanding that the only way to deter terrorists like Iran and their proxies is to put your foot on their throat. And Israel has done that. We should be assisting Israel in doing so. But again, political expediency and the quest for power by Kamala Harris and the Democrats is resulting in American national security taking a back seat, unfortunately.
That's quite disturbing.
No comment.
Yeah. Well, I'll make a comment.
Please.
I mean, first, I just want to say to acknowledge journalist Michael Tracy for highlighting that video on Twitter, which is where I found it. And of course, I mean, two things come to mind. Like, how can you pretend that keeping Mike Pompeo out of this administration is some kind of great move when you have someone who's essentially a carbon copy of Mike Pompeo taking the same job that Mike Pompeo had, head of the CIA, before he became Secretary of State? The other thing is, look at that false framing that, you know, the Democrats did nothing, as if the Biden administration has not been deploying massive U.S. military forces to the region to help Israel in its war against the Palestinian people, in its war against Lebanon, and in its attacks on Iran. So Biden is doing literally the thing that he says the U.S. should be doing, which is helping Israel to attack Iran.
What about Marco Rubio? Rumors that he's going to be Secretary of State. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's a bit more than rumors. It's a lot of reporting in mainstream media that Trump is expected to name Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, but it is not yet confirmed as of right now. Of course, Rubio is a Republican senator from Florida, and he is another fanatical supporter of Israel and a neocon who supports aggressive confrontation with China, Iran, and Venezuela, among others. And campaign records show that Rubio's top donors include the Pro-Israel America Political Action Committee and the Israel lobby group AIPAC. So he is every bit as extreme and warmongering as Antony Blinken, Joe Biden's Secretary of State. And we just have to remember that Trump filled his last administration with exactly these type of people and largely continued their policies. He, of course, ordered the assassination of Iran's General Qasem Soleimani, ramped up sanctions and pressure on both Iran and Russia. He also started shipping weapons to Ukraine that even Barack Obama had refused to send. So Trump is, despite the rhetoric, as much a neocon president as his Democratic predecessors and successors.
Yeah. So how can we square this with that tweet from his son, Donald Trump Jr., claiming that he was going to be ensuring that there would be no neocons and war hawks in his dad's new administration?
Well, it's actually quite easy. And for once, we can actually find the answer in the New York Times. If you take a look at this headline from this morning, it says, once they were neocons, now Trump's foreign policy picks are all America first. And basically, the article explains that, quote, the Republican Party used to have a label for the kind of foreign policy hawk that President-elect Donald J. Trump named on Tuesday as his national security advisor and considering as his Secretary of State, neocons. And then it goes on to explain how all these characters have rebranded themselves and are now claiming, we're not neocons, we're America firsters. And so the New York Times concludes, the result is that Mr. Trump may end up with a foreign policy team composed of deep loyalists, but with roots in familiar Republican approaches. And of course, those are the same familiar Democratic approaches, because this is the blob, the neocon imperial war machine spans both parties, and that's not going to change. So the bottom line is that these are exactly the same neocon war hawks who have consistently been expressing exactly the same extremist views right through the election campaign. Now they are simply being rebranded as anti-interventionist America firsters. Just as the genocidal Democrats market themselves as the party of empathy and inclusion, the genocidal Republicans are now marketing themselves as opponents of foreign wars. These two parties have the same policies, they just present them differently.
Yeah, indeed. Ali, do you see more continuity than change?
I think it's clear that in the grand scheme of things, the safe assumption is that the Trump administration will be absolute continuity, just as there was between the first Trump administration and Biden. As president, the first time around, Trump, of course, recognized Israeli sovereignty over occupied Jerusalem and the occupied Golan Heights, and Biden stuck to those policies. He never reversed them. Trump suspended funding for UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees. Biden came in and restored it, and then he suspended it again, and he still has not restored it. So I don't expect we'll see UNRWA funding coming back. Trump will not reverse Biden's decision to defund UNRWA. Every US administration is even more fanatically pro-Israel than the one before, and I don't think this will be an exception. I think if there will be any type of break from the foreign policy consensus, it would be around Ukraine. But given the number of anti-Russia fanatics that Trump is appointing, I doubt there will be much change there either. But Trump remains somewhat unpredictable and erratic, so you never know. Sometimes by accident, he does the right thing, and maybe we'll get lucky. But that's what it would have to be.
The broken clock theory.
Yeah.
What other factors might constrain him, finally?
Yeah, just very briefly. I think it's important to keep all this discussion in perspective. As Professor Mohammed Marandi has noted since the election, of course, we've had him on this live stream before, and hopefully we'll have him again. But in other interviews he's given on other programs, he's made the point, and I think this is a very important point, that the world of today is very different from the world of 2016 when Trump won election the first time. The US is still, of course, extremely powerful, but in relative terms, it is much weaker than it was 8 years ago. Other countries, including Russia, China, Iran, and the axis of resistance are much stronger. As we discussed with Craig Mokhiber in the previous segment, the world, the global majority, is with Palestine and against what the United States is doing. And the US and Israel have not been able to defeat or control those they've decided are their enemies under Biden. And that, of course, includes the Palestinian and Lebanese resistance and Iran. And I think it's important that no matter how malevolent their intentions are, Trump and his officials do not possess magic powers and magic military capabilities that Biden does not already have. So it may be that real change is not going to come from any internal political factors in the United States, but from regional resistance and global geopolitical power shifts that are going to continue to erode the influence, power, and freedom of action of the United States, regardless of who is in the White House.
Well, thanks for that, Ali.
And
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's it's going to be an interesting 2 months. The last 2 months of the genocidal Biden-Harris administration, and then see how Trump takes the reins and manages this genocide. It's unspeakable. We're still here, 404 days.
And we will be following it. And I just also want to thank our Electronic Intifada colleague, Michael F. Brown, who helped with a lot of the research on some of these disgusting incoming administration officials.
Yeah. He the sacrifices that Michael makes watching the mainstream corporate media so that we don't have to. Thank you, Michael. Well, we're going to bring on John. And after John, we have a special short segment from Asa. But let's bring John on to talk about resistance over the last couple of weeks in Gaza and in Lebanon. Hi, John.
Hi, guys.
Hi, John.
It's also important to point out that more people didn't vote than voted for either one of those candidates.
Yes.
This is also true in Canada in our elections.
Yeah. When faced with impossible choices,
those
people
two
tend to
choices.
Stay home. Yeah, exactly. Well, John, why don't you just take it away? There's a lot that happened in the last couple of weeks. So, yeah.
We missed a week, but you're not going to miss anything. I'm going to cover everything that happened in the last 2 weeks. So, the Resistance Bureau was working for these past 2 weeks, and we'll get you caught up to date with everything that happened. We start, as always, with our maps here. The focus, of course, is always on the battlefield in the Resistance Report, but as Nora ably describes in the introduction, the attacks are all over the Gaza Strip. They're not just on the battlefield. They attack civilians. The Israeli military attacks civilians all over Gaza. So there's your map of the whole of the Gaza Strip. We're going to focus on the north today, Jabalia in particular. But there's operations, as you can see, there's still operations along the Philadelphia corridor here in Rafah. The 5-month operation in Rafah from May to October wrapped up. And the 162nd Division moved from Rafah to besiege Jabalia in the north. And I covered that at the time when they did that. But there is still part of a division along the Philadelphia corridor continuing to do the carving of this corridor and positioning military forces in military outposts along the Philadelphia corridor. So that is still going on in Rafah. Of course, we know that Yahya Sinwar was killed in Tel Sultan right on the edge of the Philadelphia corridor. So there's still activity in Rafah, but we'll move up north in particular, and we're going to focus on Jabalia and the Jabalia refugee camp, which is north of Jabalia there that you see. That's the city of Jabalia. And I just wanted to bring a couple notes in while we're talking about the United States. The Brown University Costs of War Project released a report while we were away that detailed the amount of military aid that the U.S. has given to Israel to carry out this genocide. And they put the number at $23 billion just in this year alone. And that $23 billion does not include the multi-billion-dollar defense of Israel and Iran in the Iran arena, as well as the attack that the U.S. facilitated for Israel on Iran, both multi-billion-dollar operations. It does not include United States force posture in the region, which we know is heavy all throughout the region, particularly their deployments of aircraft carriers. These deployments are tens of billions of dollar deployments. We're just talking about $23 billion in aid to Israel so that they can buy weapons from the United States to use in this war. It does not include the Iran front, as I said. It does not include future arms sales. And we know we've seen throughout the course of the last year dozens of future arms sales that total in the tens of billions of dollars for each one of the sales, 50 fighter jets in one time, these kind of deals. So that's just an unbelievable amount of money that is given to Israel to fight this war, on top of all of the diplomatic and international legal cover that Craig so well described in the beginning, and then Ali's segment on the way that the Trump administration and the Biden administration protect Israel through this campaign. That's just a staggering amount of money. And I just want to say that Jabalia, I have given you guys over the course of this year, we'll remember back in December, Jabalia the Israelis said they had completely dismantled all three of the battalions of the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 brigades in Jabalia. At the time, in December, on this program, we said that was not true. It was obviously not true. And then in May, again, the Israelis invaded the camp again. At that time, they destroyed 70% of the camp. We'll remember back in May, that was when we saw a soldier get captured in a tunnel. We still have not heard anything about who that person was that we saw get dragged into a tunnel by 𝐓𝐡𝐞. But there was a major raid in May. And this is now the third major raid on Jabalia, which is a center of resistance in the Gaza Strip. Historically, it's a benchmark, a landmark place of battle. It's where the First Intifada began and where it raged for the 3 to 5 years of that period of uprising. It began in Jabalia. Jabalia was the center of the Second Intifada, and its fighting capabilities in Jabalia were very critical components in the Israelis leaving the Gaza Strip in 2005 because of the resistance in Jabalia. So just to point those things all out. And we remember that the Israelis said that the reason that they were going back into Jabalia was because in the shelters, the school shelters and the hospital courtyards, they were being used for people to come and pick up food stamps, to come and pick up humanitarian equipment, and to come and report crime. So that's the level of government apparatus that the Israelis are erasing at this point in the battle. They're not. This is the genocide. This is the genocide 2.0. This is them looping back on what has already been a heinous year, an unspeakable year, as Nora said, is just correct word. We don't even know what to say about it. But this last 5 weeks in Jabalia has been next level horror. They're literally erasing Jabalia and the north. And that is their project. If we look at this next map, this is a disgusting map that was drawn on the back of a napkin by a commander in the 162nd Division to Army radio. that said that this is what they were doing in this operation. The reporter he reports, this time there is no intention to allow the residents of the northern Gaza Strip to return to their homes, and that humanitarian aid will regularly enter in the southern Gaza Strip. There are no more civilians left north of Gaza City. That is a flat lie. There's hundreds of thousands of people left. They did not, Israel took over the shelters, we saw that, took over the hospitals, we saw that, emptied out the hospitals, emptied out the shelters, arrested 1,000 people, and then they burned the shelters. They burned the hospital courtyard. And they said that they were pushing people to the south. The people in Jabalia did not go to the south. The number in the entire time of the last 6-week operation that have gone south is a handful of people. The people in Jabalia are internally displaced around the area. They moved. We saw them the other day. They had a demonstration chanting "Death before dishonor," marching in protest through Jabalia. The people of Jabalia are not going to move. But this is what the Israelis are saying. And I think we just have to point this out before we get into the resistance, which was fierce this week. And there's a lot of excellent combat videos to show you. But I just want to read you from this. So the commander that made that napkin map, which is for people who read Hebrew, you'll see that it's not even geographically accurate. But he said he put this line through, he called it the blue demarcation line. The Division 162 is stationed on this blue demarcation line and is actually close to the purification of the entire northern area of the Gaza Strip. Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, Jabalia camp, and Jabalia to the south of it. It's completely not true, but that's what they're talking about. An IDF commander to Army radio describing what is going on as purification, as ethnic cleansing. And that's the goal. That's the goal that the Israelis are doing. And we saw the way that they exacted that goal was to clear all the shelters were cleared out. Anyone over the age of 13 years old, boys 13 years old to 60-year-old men had their hands tied behind their back, stripped to their underwear, blindfolded and put in the courtyard. Nora talked about the doctors that were arrested. There's children in that, middle school children in that group of people. And then the Israelis burned the shelter, literally scorched earth. And that is the way that they're carrying out this operation in Jabalia. And that same IDF commander said that they have been getting fierce resistance, as we're going to show you. He said more than 50 IEDs against them, more than 200 booby-trapped buildings. The Israeli military has admitted to, and surely there's more, 26 plus killed in action, including, as we remember, the commander of the 401st Armored Brigade, this most senior commander killed in the war. So that is the setup for what the resistance that we're about to see. Israel talking about cleansing and purifying the north, that they're almost done completing dismantling for the third time Qassam. And let's watch from these videos and see if that's actually what's happening. Video number 1 here. These fighters this is an interesting little tidbit here. This fighter's showing this other fighter how to test the fidelity of the wires for the Shawad EFP. And they're speaking in a way, we dropped the audio, of course, to try to keep these videos online. But he's describing how to do that. So we're seeing fighters being trained in these videos, very subtly being trained in these videos. So once it's rigged up, this fighter's saying on camera, he's saying this operation is in honor of the soul of our martyr, Commander Ayman Mansour. Now, Ayman Mansour was original. There you see they're using the backup camera again. Ayman Mansour was an original leader of the Qassam original cells that were founded by Yahya Sinwar. And he was part of those cells. He rose up through the ranks, was a senior commander. He's from Jabalia. He was a senior commander who was killed, he ended up becoming the deputy commander of the Northern Division. We see the Shawad there, hand detonated, not tripwire, because that's the thing the fighters were talking about. Maybe we can loop it around one more time tomorrow, because they talk about how they don't want to do a tripwire. They want to press the button themselves, and that's why you see the reverse camera being used. But Ayman Mansour rose up through the ranks of Qassam and became the deputy of the Northern Division of Qassam, deputy to Ahmed Gandour, who was killed in the beginning of the war. Ayman Mansour and his eldest son were assassinated by a collaborator in the summer before the war, and the collaborator committed suicide. It was like a criminal type collaborator action. And these fighters are saluting that. We always bring you that. These fighters salute. This is one of 75 qualitative operations that happened since you last saw me at the resistance desk telling you about the battles. And so you see these fighters, they don't want a tripwire. That's the detonator for the Shawad right there. You see a Merkava tank through the backup camera. We're going to see that a couple times in this. But you can see the direct line that's connected right under the tank. And then they're watching from this closed circuit camera using a second camera that's the reverse camera. So we're seeing these things. We've seen these things all through the war. But the way Israel described that to Army radio in my introduction, you'd think that the place was empty and there's no resistance left and there's no people left. It's completely not true. They're intending to commit genocide and erase, ethnically cleanse the population, but it's not happening. Number two is a tunnel-borne operation. Qassam is able to still battle above and below ground, still able to coordinate above and below ground. They see a Humvee here, so we just have an RPG-7, a single round, not a tandem charge Yasin. Again, appropriate weapons. You don't need a tandem charge to hit the thinner-skinned Humvee that you're going to see. We're seeing two camera angles here because another fighter comes out. There's the Humvee up at the top there getting the triangle. You can see, and then that's shot by the fighter that comes out of the tunnel. And now we're going to see a second shot here. That's the body cam of the archer himself. And you can see there's a tank beside the Humvee. But because of the weapon he's got, he's firing on the Humvee. And then again, professional fighters, both down under the ground, immediately escaping. You can see the detonation. You can see the round hit on those. So these tunnel operations are just incredible because you literally see him come out of the ground. Sometimes they show you when they're just on the ground crawling, and I tell you that that's a tunnel-borne operation. But on these ones, you know for sure that it's a tunnel-borne operation because you literally see their heads coming out of the tunnel. And two of them go back into the tunnel safely after firing on this Humvee. This is one of two Humvees that was hit throughout the course of that 75 operations that went, qualitative operations that happened this week. And you can see the way that the warhead is painted. It's not clear. There's a couple more examples I'm going to show you throughout this that seem to indicate they're manufacturing weapons in Jabalia since the May operation. And you can see safely through the tunnel. Number three, this is going to be a Yasin strike. And again, see the warhead there? That's a newly lathed warhead. That is not painted black like their previous ones. They're using what they have, but they're apparently able to lathe these and manufacture these in the course of the war. So this is 2 for 2. That they have made these weapons. You can hear in the audio of this track, if you want to go to my Twitter, you can hear them talking, the Hebrew soldiers, the soldiers speaking in Hebrew. And this is a direct strike on the crew compartment. They go back down in the tunnel of the crew compartment, which holds 10 soldiers on this Ashkaret troop carrier, which is not as heavily up armored as a Namr troop carrier. So this is likely a devastating blow. The Israelis, like I said, 26 plus admitted. Almost all of them, they have said, were from anti-tank fire. So this is what you're seeing: anti-tank fire hitting this Ashkaret, which is an older. These were the troop carriers that they used in the Second Intifada, and the fighter again goes down in the tunnel. Yassin strikes against 7 APCs, 4 tanks, 2 Humvees, and 13 D9s. So the next one, number 4 here, we're going to see this is southeast of the Jabalia camp. This is going to be a troop carrier again. We see the fighters moving through these destroyed buildings that have no military purpose, destroying the place like this. Look at all through that camera shot. Absolutely no military purpose to leaving these camouflaged positions from which the soldier can fire. And if you look at the precursor on that Tandem 85, you can see that it's milled. It hasn't been painted at all. So they add the second charge, the precursor charge, to make it a tandem, and they fire it and direct hit. Again, no interception by the APS of that tank. You can see that's a direct hit on the roof. So interesting. And then I just have the still picture that we were going to show you here of the round in flight, because 𝐶𝐐 gave us that, the tandem charge. So that's the Tandem 85. That's not the Yassin 105. And the precursor charge has been just made, because you can see the milling, the lathing, not the milling, but the lathe markings on it, and it's still silver. So another qualitative operation. Number 5 here is a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 sniper, again using the Al-Ghul or the Sayed 50 cal, made after the Steyr 50 cal, the Austrian anti-material rifle that we've seen. The Al-Ghul is an upgrade on that weapon. It's difficult to tell without seeing the markings which one exactly we're looking at here, but it's an Al-Ghul for all intents and purposes. And again, this one required a little bit of editing to make sure that this video stays up. If YouTube's listening, we edited out the video. These videos are all PG. So the soldier, you're going to see him, the tank crewman, he's going to emerge here out of the top of his Merkava. Soraya gives us a triangle and a bullseye on him. This was a successful sniper operation, but we left the edit at that. That was one of 2 sniper operations since you saw me last. Number 6 is another qualitative operation. This is a 2-stage operation using a backup camera. Again, the 𝐶𝐐 fighters are going to fire a thermobaric warhead into the house where the Israeli troops are to chase them out of the house. And I had to edit out the walking, but there's 4 troops that walk just before that explosion. 4 troops walk out, 4 triangles. You watch the 4 triangles walk out to the behind, and the fighter sees them and he goes, here they are, detonate, detonate. And the second guy goes, hold on, just wait. And then he waits for the 4th guy to go, and then he detonates it. Again, using a reverse camera to get the job done. The Israelis admitted 3 killed in this operation, 1 seriously wounded. As you can see, you can't see, you can see it on my Twitter, but I cut out the 4 soldiers walking to the tank so that we can keep these videos up. So you didn't see any of that. Just a remarkable operation, 2-stage operation, setting the device in a place that you know the tank is going to go to bring troops into that building that the troops are taking over. You flush them out of the building with an anti-personnel thermobaric warhead, and they run out of the building because it's an explosive charge, and then they walk right into that tank that is prepared already with the 𝐓𝐡𝐞. So remarkable operation and significant 𝐓𝐡𝐞 charge there. Possible barrel bomb that we're looking at there. Which a barrel bomb can just be filled up with unexploded Israeli ordnance. They can just put high explosives from an unexploded 2,000-pound bomb, and they can literally just pour it into a barrel and make it that size. However much you can carry can be the size of it. So a remarkable operation. This is all happening in Jabalia, where they're telling you that they have dismantled 𝐶𝐶. We're seeing all these different types of operations. Number 7 is another interesting one. So these guys are, again, going to set up the wiring. They want to be pressing the button. They can set up tripwires. As the Israelis said, there's 50 tripwire booby-trapped IEDs and 200 booby-trapped houses. But here we're going to you see the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 there on the EFP is in that bag. The bulldozer here, the D9, is towing a disabled Namr troop carrier that was blown up in battle. So he's dragging it along this route. And the fighters pass on the D9. They pass on the Namr because the Namr is probably empty. And also then he's got a tank escort here, a Merkava tank escort. So 3 choices there, and they chose the tank. Possibly could have chose, if you're going to Monday morning quarterback these incredible fighters that we've been watching for 13 months do everything right, it seems. You might have gone after the D9 first because the D9s have been used, and the D9s have been most targeted by Qassam in this operation because it's a genocidal operation in Jabalia. They're pushing down the buildings that are left standing, that have been blown up. Israel's going around with their D9s and tipping them over. And so you can see that in the statistics, 12 tanks, 2 APCs, 2 D9s. But with Yassins, 13 D9s have been hit with Yassins, which is more than tanks and APCs combined. So they are picking on the engineering vehicles. In this case, they might have believed that they had more soldiers in the compartment. But these tanks, the one thing that the Merkava has is really thick underbelly armor. And that is also because of Qassam. Roadside bombs, as they used to be called. The bomb where you bury it in the road and you could bury massive amounts of explosives. During the Second Intifada, the Qassam brigades got half a dozen Merkava tanks, blew them to pieces, and Israel immediately retrofitted the underbelly to protect against those operations. But still, you can see the fighters operating in all these different kind of ways in Jabalia in the face of the genocide. So that is the resistance report for the battle in Jabalia. It is going on fierce. And as I said, let me just give you the last numbers for it. 75 operations, 3 booby traps, 2 sniper operations, 5 thermobaric warheads fired from Yassins at troop positions, 7 close quarters battles, 5 IEDs, 2 fragmentation warheads versus troops, 5 IEDs versus troops, 7 close quarters battles versus troops. And then with the Shawaz, 12 tanks, 2 APCs, 2 D9 with Shawaz EFPs. With the Yassins, 4 tanks, 7 APCs, 2 Humvees, 13 D9s, just since you last saw me. So they're fighting heavily in the Jabalia camp. We are going to move now further north to the Lebanon front, and we're going to show you some maps to set up the Lebanon front here. The first map will give you a sense of where the main targeting is. That's the border. The red area is the area south of the Litani River. That's 40 kilometers north of the border. We're going to call it the border just for simplicity. It's not a border. It's a blue line, demarcation line. But you can see the overwhelming focus of the attacks is from the Litani River down to the southern demarcation line. But also you can see all through Beirut and Baalbek in the Bekaa Valley also being targeted, Christian villages being targeted, massacres being carried out all the time. Hezbollah yesterday, 20 operations, 18 of them in historic Palestine, 145 kilometers deep, 100 airstrikes a day by the Israeli Air Force. And we're going to look at this in number 11 here as a battle damage map that's showing you where they're concentrating. So 5 miles, the 5 miles distinction they're making is double the furthest point that Israel has crossed the border in this vaunted ground maneuver. Although they have said it's been delimited, they are not moving across the border in any significant way. But what they are doing is destroying from the air and from artillery all of these villages like Ait Tashab, which is a 400-year-old village. And many of those villages are newer along the border. Some of them literally like Kfar Kila that you'll see up at the top. It's literally attached to the border. That's what they're destroying. And 50% of the buildings in the darkened area means 50% of the buildings in the entire town are erased. And that has happened mostly in the last 2 weeks. If we look at the next one, you can see this is the classic Israeli satellite eraser, satellite imaging of them just erasing people's villages, people's lives. These can be rebuilt. They will be rebuilt. Hezbollah has a reconstruction and construction unit in its in its organization. These places will all be rebuilt. But right now, Israel's priority is destroying them. 6,000 buildings alone in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, and that is a place that we're going to focus on. If we look at this next map, that's just the before and after of the damage. So this is by the Institute for the Study of War, and these were the guys that CNN said were forensic when they reported on what we have been reporting on since October when they did it once. But this is a very exaggerated map showing how far the Israelis have crossed the border. And the map there, no spot is more than 4 kilometers. And that is not forward operating positions. Israel is not having positions in those spots. They're moving forward. They get contact. They withdraw. They're not setting their forces up in places like we see in Jabalia, where they're setting up their forces inside Jabalia. That is not happening in any of the villages. 6 weeks into this war, and none of that has happened in any of the villages. In the western sector, the 142nd Division, Hezbollah said yesterday, there hasn't been a cross-border move by the 146th Division since the 28th of October. On the eastern edge, 26 operations by Hezbollah targeting Marun al-Ras, which is on the right-hand side of that map. You can see Marun al-Ras, again, on the edges of these. And then the next map will show you the Galilee Panhandle, where the 91st Division is operating. And it's important to note, Israeli newspaper Yedioth Ahronoth the other day reported that the Israelis have deployed over 50,000 troops, 5 divisions to the border, and the Israeli military has yet to capture even a single village, Yedioth Ahronoth said. Hezbollah has told us that too, but here you get it from the Israelis. They have failed to secure a foothold anywhere in the area. What that means is they're returning to the border. They're not staying in Lebanon. They're returning to the border. And they're getting hit really hard. They're getting hit in batches of 5. They're losing soldiers in batches of 5. One example, 4 soldiers peered into a tunnel shaft in South Lebanon, and they expected to be empty. They were wrong. Hezbollah militants hiding inside detonated explosive devices, tossed hand grenades, and the Israelis came under fire. 9 killed, 19 injured. We saw the one last week where fighters took over a house right on the edge of town. They took over the house to make it a forward position, their first forward position of the 6-week war. And Hezbollah came up from the basement and fought them in the stairwell of the house. 5 injured, 16 injured, 5 killed in that, and they withdrew. So that is the theme of what you're looking at on this advance. This is the ground maneuver. If anyone is telling you, if you're reading in the newspaper that Israel is invading Lebanon and that they're having a ground maneuver inside Lebanon, it's not true. It's not true. You're looking at these maps. You're hearing it from their own newspapers, from their own military statements, that they do not have a single village. They are on the outskirts of the village. And listen to what Army radio reporter said when he got back from Lebanon. What can be learned about the ground maneuver in southern Lebanon from the IDF spokesman announcements that are officially published every morning during the last few weeks, which is what I base my work on, along with Hezbollah's. Until 2 weeks ago, the IDF reported every morning 4 divisions operating in southern Lebanon, 91st, 146th, 98th, 36th. Later, several days, the IDF reported every morning 3 divisions operating in South Lebanon. Last week, from Monday to Friday, the IDF reported one morning 2 divisions operating in southern Lebanon, 91st and 146th. On Saturday, the IDF reported that 1 division, the 91st, is operating in South Lebanon. Yesterday and today, they reported 2 divisions attempted to cross the border. So we've been told there's 5 divisions on the border that are invading Lebanon, that are carrying out ground maneuvers. It's just not true. It's not happened yet. It may happen, but it still has not happened yet. The most that they have moved is 3 to 4 kilometers on the outskirts of the town of 𝐓𝐡𝐞, which has the most forested land in front of it. So you're being told lies if you are being told that Israel is moving forward. They're simply not moving forward. Hezbollah said where are you guys in their field report yesterday? It's like, where are you guys? Anyways, number 15 here is what they are doing, right? This is what Israel always does. They're attacking the hospitals. They're killing the paramedics. They're destroying the ambulances. This is only up until October 23rd. They're doing it every day. Every single day, Amal, the Shia movement, releases their health reporter stats, and 2, 3, 5, 7 paramedics killed a day in double tap strikes. Israel strikes a civilian target. The paramedics run to help, and Israel strikes the paramedics. So even CNN, I left this one in just to be like, even CNN knows it. They're not fighting fighters. They won't fight face to face. They bomb from the air. They fire artillery, and they're great at attacking hospitals, killing paramedics. And yeah, it's just unbelievable. But that's the setup for the resistance report from Lebanon. So let's start at number 16. Hezbollah's been playing on this. Their psychological operations in these last 2 weeks since you saw me last have been pretty solid. So this is a psychological operation that says, in 1982, you reached Beirut in 7 days. In 2006, you reached Wadi Hajar in 33 days. Wadi Hajar was the graveyard of the Merkava. What ended the war. And as for today, this is what's counting, what you're seeing counting. Oh, this is the 33rd day. But now watch what they do here. They're saying, here we go. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, 0 kilometers from the border. Day 20, 0 kilometers from the border. Day 26, 0 kilometers from the border. Day 40 or day 26, escaping soldiers, retreating soldiers that you're going to see here. 13, 14, 15, and then they say day 40, you're still fighting on the outskirts of the border villages, and then they leave it. They say between us and you is the battlefield. So these psychological operations, Hezbollah, since you last saw me, Hezbollah carried out 300 qualitative operations, and that means an 80 rocket barrage counts as one qualitative, we'll call it one operation of 300. If they send 20 drones, it counts as one operation. 300 distinct operations, 25 a day being carried out. They're firing 200 rockets a day. They've killed 100 Israeli soldiers. They've destroyed 20 tanks, at least half that we've seen, 2 APCs. So this battle is ongoing, and I'm going to set up each of these next parts with a psychological operation and then the operation itself. So let's look at number 17. This is an operation in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜. This is where they've destroyed 80% of the village. This village is attached to the border, and you don't see tanks, right? We never see tanks, very rarely see tanks, because they're not doing tank maneuvers. They're moving gingerly across the border with their troops, moving into these positions. So we're watching here soldiers moving around into their base. Now look on the roof. They're going to pop up a Israeli flag, massive Israeli flag, just so that the entire south of Lebanon knows what building the soldiers are in. Here, guys, they can't get it up. They're struggling with it, but they want to put it up to take a TikTok video. And then they want that video to go back to Israel to be like, look, we're in villages in South Lebanon, when they're not. They're not in these villages. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐜 is right on the border, like literally attached to the border. Anyways, you can see them move around here. And once again, this required an edit from me. I edited out the explosion of the cornet hitting these soldiers. Suffice it to say, it hit them. I edited it out. And what you're going to see happen is the Israeli military firing a smokescreen to cover their wounded soldiers that I edited out. And that is what you're seeing. So if YouTube thinks that that's the explosion, it's not. The explosion is removed, and the explosion that you see is the Israeli military firing. So we can see here, there's the Cornet. There's the Cornet anti-tank guided missile flying into the circle. And then we don't show the hit, but we're going to see the Israelis fire a smokescreen to cover it. So don't confuse that and say that we didn't edit this video, YouTube, because we very diligently vet and edit these videos to strictly adhere to community guidelines. So that's a Cornet fired from 4 kilometers away. So if the Israelis were 4 kilometers into Lebanon, then they would be at where that cornet is, but they're not, and they're getting hit. And there was at least, well, actually, this operation was interesting because the IDF did not acknowledge any dead within 6 days of this operation. So they're covering it up. Number 18 is another PSYOP. Here, this is a new feature in Palestine, looking up and seeing drones. This is a drone PSYOP. We're hearing in Hebrew on this video, Israelis looking up and saying, like, look, a drone. Another one says, a drone. Someone says, oh my God. They're pointing up in the air at the drone. Someone says, how come the helicopter can't catch it? How come it can't see it? Then there's a fighter jet you see come through there. The other guy says, here's a drone. God knows where it's going. Keep looking up. These are all in Hebrew. They're for the Israelis. It's a psychological operation. It's a video produced of their people reacting to the drones. There's the helicopters that can't find the video or can't find the drone. So yeah, that was in its finishes. Keep looking up. And number 19 just shows you that these are daily fixtures in Israel. These drones flying over and people on the drone being like, there it is, like, oh my God, pointing and putting their cameras up. And these are separate drones. They're all over. They're flying all over Palestine, looking for Israeli military targets to hitting strategic objectives. In this, this is a new feature of life in Israel. It started before the war, but it really, or it started before this escalation of the war. It's been going on for the most of the past year, but not to this level. This is completely new. Number 20, I'll show you a bunch of drone strikes that they're pointing out. Again, Hezbollah's using these maps to show you not just that they have all this intelligence, but showing you where they're hitting, that these are targeting strategic objectives, military bases that are on the map. Their target acquisition department is picking the targets that are not civilian targets. These could be raining down on Tel Aviv. They're not. The Israelis can't find these. They can't find the drones all kinds of times when you watch. If you watch the military field reports, the Israelis are saying there's a drone over the Galilee. We're looking for it. Like, they literally say, like, we can't find it. We're looking for it. We have multiple assets in the air trying to locate it. And then they'll, post 15 minutes later, the drone impacted. We're not sure where it impacted. They're just chasing their tails on these. They're not able to knock them out. So then this is an operation where you use the drones to deflect the attention of the Israelis, and then you fire these more qualitative Nasser 2 guided missiles. So these are precision guided missiles, 302 millimeter with a 150 kilo warhead. And they're all targeting bases. They're targeting Al-Aqsa base, Ain Shemer, which is an old Royal Air Force base in the north. They're targeting Ramat David Air Base. The maps show the maps that Hezbollah is showing you are showing you their intelligence, their level of detail that they have in the intelligence. It's always remarkable to point that out, what they're doing. And their last operation is going to be against the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 military base. And here we're seeing, that's one. Can we go, did 20 finish? Okay. This is 21. This is Hezbollah knocking a Hermes 900 out of the sky. We'll loop it around one more time because I was caught off guard. No, I don't need 20 again. It's no problem. I'm just going to give you the drone stats. So this video begins with a patch. Let's see that patch. It says the air defense unit of the Islamic resistance. And it says, we have made a canopy in the sky, like a metaphor for a defensive shield, an anti-access area denial shield that they have created. And here they are downing the flagship drone made by Elbit. made by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 for the IDF, for the Israeli Air Force. And this is another one being shot down. Since October 1st, 4 Hermes 450 and 2 Hermes 900 have been shot down. I just want to give you the numbers from the last one, because the number 20 ended on an attack on Glilot, which is where the Mossad base, Amman military intelligence base, and Unit 8200, the key signals intelligence base. So that is a very significant target that they have been hitting before. And then so Israel wrote this recently. According to fresh IDF data, 1,300 drones have been launched at Israel amid the war from all fronts, from Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. The IDF says 231 of the drones struck Israel, and they say here, this is the key, Hezbollah forces currently are left with less than 30% of the drones it had before the war, thought to be hundreds. Well, we've seen hundreds be fired, so that's ridiculous. The Israelis say to Khan News, their national broadcaster, they say the army deploys soldiers at observation posts along the border now to watch for the drones with their eyes, which is what we saw them doing in the bunker of the evacuated village of Metula when 60 Minutes took us on a tour in there that I showed you. So yeah, the Israelis are telling their population that there's down to 30% of Hezbollah's drone capacity. It's just not true. First of all, they don't know the number of drones. But second of all, Hezbollah can resupply during the war. That's a crucial distinction in this battle that doesn't exist for Gaza. Gaza is under siege. They can't resupply in the traditional sense. They can resupply by reusing unexploded ordnance, but they can't resupply in the traditional sense. So that's double mistake by the Israelis. And then after this one, we've got another PSYOP, because we're going to see here the motorcycles. These dirt bikes are synonymous with Hezbollah. And here they are ripping through another underground missile base. This is the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 missile base. I've shown you on the show the 𝐓𝐡4, but they ride their motorcycles under it. They have their truck launched. Heavy caliber missiles are launched from these underground positions. There's audio in this video that's Syed Hassan Nasrallah saying, "We are here. We cannot be weakened. We cannot be afraid. We will never surrender. We are here. We will never leave the battlefield. We will never lay down our weapons." And you see the rockets launched at Haifa Bay here from underneath the ground. You see the ground opening up. And Israel says that they've destroyed 80% of Hezbollah's rockets. It's just absurd. They have these underground missile bases that are not knocked out. Even if you knocked out 80% of the above ground, that's a fraction of these underground launchers. And look at the size of the missiles that they launch from these sites. So this is a PSYOP video that says, we're here. We're here on the battlefield. We won't leave the battlefield. We will not lay down our weapons. And like I said, in these barrages, they're firing 80 and 90 rockets in a single barrage. 200 rockets a day by Hezbollah is a number that is consistent throughout the last many months. They've been firing between 150 and 200 rockets. So yeah, when Yoav Gallant left, he said that they had less than 20% of their rocket capability. It's just completely untrue. And these PSYOP videos, psychological operations aimed at Israelis, the Lebanese like to see them as well, but these are aimed. That's why it's Hebrew. This is just classic Hezbollah to put these videos right into the Israeli public. And showing you these missiles, and showing you, just like to note, these missiles could be rained down on Tel Aviv. They could be rained down on Israeli cities, and they're not. Hezbollah is not doing that. They're hitting military targets, despite the fact that 3,000 Lebanese have been killed. They're killing 200 children. There's 1 million people displaced. The honor in their force is still to not massacre civilians like Israel does. And they watch in Gaza, and they watch in their own neighborhoods in Beirut. They watched it happen to their own leader and his family and family members all around the Dahia, that they do hit that. So 23 is that was a psychological operation, and this is an actual operation. This is the first this is a debut of the Fatah 110 missile. This is fired at Tel Aviv to a site just south of Ben Gurion Airport, a Srifin camp, a key Israeli military camp. The key details of the Fatah 110, we've known they had them for a long time, but you can see it's a pretty formidable missile. It's a solid fuel, precision guided, 500 kilogram warhead, 300 kilometer range, launched from the underground missile base. So it has the explosive capability of a 2,000 pound Israeli bomb, which is what Israel rains down on tent camps in Garabala these days and Jabalia. But Hezbollah has these, and for these to enter the battle, we've been waiting for this. Not totally sure why they wait so long. I think they, like Naim Qassem, the leader, said in a speech the other day that they're prepared for a long war of attrition. So they're playing it carefully still. And then there's these are settler cameras showing you the strikes on the Shrifan camp. Didn't get that. But yeah, and then number 24, this is the last one for Hezbollah. This is another underground launch of Fadi and Nasser rockets at the Israeli Air Forces. So you can see that's launched from the underground launcher, again, targeting the Israeli Air Force Technical College, College of Aviation, so like the training school. So these are strategic targets that are being hit. On Monday, 200 rockets were fired, 6 soldiers critically wounded in rocket fire on Metula, and there's been 1,020 rocket barrages since September 17th, and 125 barrages this week. So barrages are 80, 90, 60. Often they're 80 and more rockets in each launch. So significant. That's the Nasser 1 you're seeing being launched there. Precision guided. This is part of Hezbollah's precision guided system project to get these weapons precision guided. And just to tack on to the end of the Lebanon front here, I want to show you the Yemeni armed forces are still at it, and they got another drone. They got another U.S. Air Force Reaper drone number 12 since the battle in the Red Sea began. Drone number 15 since 2017. So they've downed 15 $30+ million MQ-9 Reaper drones from the U.S. Air Force that are flying over and attacking Yemen. And they did this one. This one was from just the other day. So up to date, 12 have been lost, and you can see it falling from the sky. And Mohammed al-Bukaiti, he's a spokesperson for Ansar Allah. He sent out a message that was just, I'm going to close on this message. He said, since October 7th, 2023 until now, not a single case of killing an Israeli child has been recorded on the resistance axis, while America has killed more than 20,000 Palestinian and Lebanese children so far. Who's the terrorist? Just a simple statement that I think we can wrap up with. When you compare the horror in Gaza and the way that Israel and the United States fight their wars, and compare them to the way that Hezbollah has fought, defending their villages without attacking civilians, without massacring civilians, which all of those rockets and missiles could do if that was their intention. It's not their intention. They're fighting an honorable fight to protect those villages. And so far, they've been successful. Israel has not invaded with a major ground maneuver into Lebanon. It has not happened. It may happen, but it has not yet happened. And Hezbollah fighters even said it today. Where are you guys in their communique? So that is the resistance report. Those videos there was many more from Hezbollah. I tried to synchronize them into some themes, but they are releasing videos constantly. I showed you every single video from the Palestinian resistance. So you are completely up to date. You didn't miss anything from us being away for a week.
Wow. Thank you so much, John. I think it was just earlier today, or maybe it was yesterday, when Antony Blinken said that Israel has achieved all of its goals in both Gaza and Lebanon. They've, debilitated Hamas and Hezbollah, and it's time to wrap up the war.
And Israel Katz, the new Israeli defense minister who replaced Yoav Gallant, said, we won't accept any ceasefire, and we haven't finished our goals. We haven't achieved our goals. And our goals in Lebanon are disarming Hezbollah south of the Lebanese border and south of the Litani River, disarming them up to 40 kilometers into Lebanon. And I think that news came before the news that 7 Israeli soldiers were killed in one incident in South Lebanon.
Well, as senior Israeli generals told Army Radio that there could be a political settlement without an agreement, a unilateral ceasefire. So they're talking about a unilateral ceasefire where they secure the border. They don't push in deeper because they don't appear to want to do that right now.
They can't do that.
They can't do it.
They can't. They're incapable of doing it.
And so that they'll have a unilateral ceasefire. Maybe when we have more time, I'll get into that next week. A little more about what the options are that Israel has talked about, because this ground invasion, which I have said right from the start, and Israel has said right from the start, has been delimited. That was the word they used: targeted, delimited. And Israel is trying to say that it's successful because it prevented the Radwan units from invading Israel. So they framed it as a defensive move, and now they're framing it as securing the border. And if those two things happen, that there might be an end to the war in Lebanon.
Well, we will, of course, keep bringing our audience, our readers, viewers, and listeners all the news on what is. I mean, it's just, things are just accelerating so quickly. It's hard to keep up. So I know we all appreciate you being on top of that. As always, John. So let's turn to Asa. And let's see, Asa, you were watching last week how the media and politicians were covering the rampage by violent Israeli football fans in Amsterdam. They went berserk, and it wasn't really a surprise necessarily. Israeli sports fans have habitually expressed themselves with racist, genocidal vitriol, violence over the years. But you have some detailed analysis on what happened last week in Amsterdam, how the political class and the corporate media covered it, and why it's important to talk about what happened.
Yeah, that's right, Nora. We've been seeing a lot of commentary about this on social media, and a surprising amount of debunking by a wide amount of you could say alternative media, some of our friends. But I've been doing my own analysis of it, and I'm going to get into that now. So the Dutch capital, Amsterdam, has been in a state of uproar this week, and there's been hundreds of arrests after authorities used emergency powers to ban Palestine solidarity demonstrations in the city, attacking protesters who defied the ban. It seems very reminiscent of Germany in a lot of ways. And this all comes in the wake of last week's Israeli riots in the city. Yes, you heard that right. Racist Israeli riots in a major European capital. And Dutch authorities are siding with the Israeli aggressors and punishing the victims, who are, it does seem to be, they are disproportionately victims of Arab and Muslim descent. On Wednesday and Thursday last week, supporters of the Israeli football team Maccabi Tel Aviv rampaged through the city, tearing down Palestinian flags, assaulting Dutch citizens, mostly those of Arab descent, and generally causing chaos. And they'd been in the city for a supposedly friendly European Championship match against the Dutch side Ajax.
Asa, I read in the New York Times that it was actually a pogrom against Jews in the city, these were anti-Semitic race riots. People on social media said that it was a modern Kristallnacht, an egregious act of anti-Semitism that Biden and Trudeau and European leaders very sternly condemned. That's what I read. Are you saying that that's not the case?
Well, yes, Western media, Western corporate media and Western politicians have almost uniformly taken the Israeli propaganda line and promoted their false narrative about events on the ground in Holland last week. But as the Dutch Palestinian analyst and Middle East expert Moin Rabbani put it on X, formerly Twitter, he's been doing some really good commentary about it, analysis about it. He said that the real pogrom in this post on screen here, he said that the real pogrom that took place was actually a pogrom by these Israeli football hooligans targeting Dutch citizens of Arab descent. I will turn to the media propaganda later on, but let's look at the facts of what actually happened on the ground first. So despite all the Western media lies, it's not that hard to find out what really happened. There were multiple videos posted on social media ahead of the match, before any of the alleged, self-defense of Dutch citizens took place later on. There were multiple videos posted on social media showing Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters chanting racist and genocidal slogans ahead of the match, tearing down Palestinian flags on private homes in the city. This video that we're about to show now, and several others like it, were widely viewed on social media ahead of the match, which took place on Thursday last week, Thursday the 7th of November. This video it was posted earlier that same day, the 7th of November. I don't know when it was filmed, but it was certainly posted before the match. According to our professional Hebrew translator and Israel expert Dina Shunra, in the audio of this video, the Maccabi hooligan filming it says, quote, "Come on, bring down that stinking flag, bring it down." Then after the flag is pulled down, he says, "Go for it, God, Israel." So this is the kind of things that they were doing. There were several other videos like this. In the next video, we're going to show, also widely shared on social media, arriving Maccabi hooligans openly chant genocidal slogans. Now, a warning and an apology in advance for the bad language here. Tamara, if you could play this video with the sound on. All right, thanks for that, Tamara. Enough of that. So for our listeners, what the subtitles read there, is the subtitles said, "Let the IDF win." IDF, of course, being the Israeli military. "Let the IDF win. Let them F the Arabs." Except obviously they use the actual F word, the Hebrew equivalent of it. So the chants actually got even worse. The next video. There's a video of Maccabi hooligans arriving back in Tel Aviv airport after their successful rampage in the city. If you could play that tomorrow. Thanks, Tamara. Yeah, so for listeners, again, what is said there, after the same foul-mouthed racist chant we heard in the previous video, it continued saying, "Gaza has no school, there are no children left there." So that's actually been a popular genocidal chant in Israel for many years now. And what's significant about that chant is it's not only admitting to the fact that the Israeli military has killed tens of thousands of children in Gaza, but they're openly celebrating the fact. And these are the same fans that were supposed to believe there was a anti-Semitic pogrom carried out against them.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's unbelievable, but, knowing the history of the so-called state of Israel over the last 76 years, knowing that the vast majority of the Jewish Israeli population supports the current genocide in Gaza, unfortunately, it's all too believable. Asa, what happened next?
Okay, well, at the match itself that evening, there doesn't seem to have been any violent confrontations between the fans of the two sides. Ajax itself is generally reputed to be a pro-Israel side. However, at the start of the match, the Maccabi hooligans did deliberately disrupt a minute silence that had been arranged in solidarity with the victims of the recent flooding in Valencia in Spain. Let's watch that short clip now. Thanks, Tamara. So the you can hear in that clip there the Israelis deliberately whistling and otherwise making noise during the minute silence, as well as Dutch fans trying to shush them. And the camera panned over to a large screen saying "In memory of the flood victims in Valencia." The context here, which is quite important to mention, is that Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez last month urged other countries to stop selling weapons to Israel. And after the flood in Valencia, many Israelis gloated online about the flood, saying that it was punishment from God for criticizing Israel. In the match itself, Maccabi Tel Aviv was thrashed by Ajax 5-0.
So ostensibly that was also divine punishment as well.
Yeah, I guess so. So it was after the match, but it was after the match itself, when it was over, that the Israeli violence in Amsterdam really seems to have kicked off, as well as these kind of racist scenes and repeatedly violence the day before. Now it was on the night itself. So fortunately, we have got two really good on the ground sources which show us what really happened. First of all, there was the Dutch photojournalist Annette de Graaf. She was there on the ground as the Israeli hooligans emerged from the stadium grounds and from their hotel. And also there was a young popular Dutch YouTuber who owns a channel, just a young teenage guy.
He's like 17, yeah?
Right, yeah. I've seen different reports. It's the channel. So I was just looking into the channel. It's only a year old, this channel, but it's very popular. It's got more than 200,000 followers, about the same amount as us. It's only a year old, and according to a Dutch report, he was 14 when it started. So he's probably about 15 or 16 now.
Wow.
And so he just goes to. It seems he just goes to events with large crowds and just sort of reports on them on the ground. Protests, football hooligans, gay pride events, things like that. So he's just he doesn't seem to have. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't speak Dutch, but this particular video was subtitled into English, so you can see. But he doesn't seem to have any particular political axe to grind, as it were. He's just sort of following events on the ground. So after watching this video, it's very clear. So what happened, as well as the reporting of the Dutch photojournalist, what happened was that there was a large group of Maccabi hooligans who after the match, they're probably angry that their side lost as well. They donned masks, dark clothing, and they armed themselves, and they headed into the center of Amsterdam looking to attack Arabs, tear down Palestinian flags, whatever they were trying to do.
What did they arm themselves with?
So they armed themselves with stolen metal, and you can see this clearly in Bender's video. They armed themselves with stolen metal bars they stole from a building site, wooden sticks, stones, flares, and what appeared to have been smoke bombs. So Annette de Graaf, the photojournalist, posted the following video the very same night to her X account. her X account, she's known as 𝐴NET because she shoots on an iPhone. If we could play the 𝐴NET video in full tomorrow. Oh, it's not that long. Thank you. So like you can see they're all dressed in dark clothes, but some of them you'll notice have got that's a police van passing by doing nothing. You'll be able to see in a minute some of these hooligans have got the distinctive yellow team colours of Maccabi Tel Aviv, although most of them seem to be trying to disguise themselves a little with the dark clothes. There you go, the yellow. There. So it was, it's hard to catch, but if you watch it over again, you can see that they're attacking a young Dutch man, I assume of Arab heritage. So for our listeners, what we saw in the video, we saw this mob of hooligans attack and beat this young man. From the safe distance that de Graaf was wisely keeping between herself and the hooligans, it's unclear whether the young man was of Arab heritage or not, but it seems likely. As you could hear, there was a siren in the near distance and a police car driving by doing nothing. So there's no doubt, as I said, as to the identity of these hooligans doing the attack, from which side they were from. And Annette de Graaf herself has repeatedly confirmed on her X account that the violent attackers were the Israelis. And the YouTuber Bender also followed the Israeli hooligans after the match throughout the night. In this video that I mentioned, it's a 17-minute long video. I watched the whole thing. He provides a running commentary in Dutch as his camera person filmed. And it went viral. It's got about 1.4 million views on YouTube alone, as well as I assume lots of clips on X and so forth. He's now added full English subtitles to the YouTube video. And from that video, we learned quite a lot about the hooligans' violent rampage that night. We're going to play some silent extracts from the video as I talk us through them, based partly on Bender's own commentary, since it's in Dutch. So if we play the start of that now, they return to their hotel after their side's defeat at the football stadium. A large group of Israeli hooligans stole metal bars from a nearby building site, and they then immediately began attacking people, including police. We can see some of that here. According to the YouTuber, he says in this clip, one of these poles was thrown at a nearby taxi, a taxi driver and a police car. A lot has been said about the taxi drivers. Like in a lot of European cities, taxi drivers are certainly Uber taxi drivers are often disproportionately of migrant background heritage. You can see that happening there. So a police car can be seen. This seems to be the same incident that Annette de Graaf was filming, incidentally, it looks like, from a slightly different angle. A police car can be seen in the video, again, driving by, doing nothing. And you can see in this clip, I think we're just about to see, two people, probably Asian tourists, seen running away from the scene, visibly distressed. So as we're seeing here now, the Israeli mob regroups, leaves the hotel en masse. You can see them walking away there. And what Bender is saying is that they were heading towards the city centre. So, he would know that. Two police vans were present at this stage, but they appear to do nothing. And throughout the entire video, the YouTuber repeatedly comments that the police were either absent or doing nothing to stop the Israeli violence. And in another scene later on in the video, there's actually a Palestine solidarity sort of counter-protest, which was moved by authorities away from the stadium. And they are, by contrast, the pro-Palestinians are very tightly controlled by the police and sort of cordoned by the police. Now, in the next clip, we see that this is the most violent part of the Bender video, probably. Reaching the city centre, the hooligans encountered a group. You can see them rushing there at a group of Dutch people. Again, we can't quite tell, possibly of Arab origins. And you can see there in this clip, they're wielding wooden planks, and according to Bender, although I didn't catch it in the video, they threw fireworks at them as well. So the video, you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. The video continues like that for some time, and the YouTuber follows the Israeli rampage around the city. Our friends at the Grey Zone did a report on it as well, along with they asked the Dutch police for comment and so forth. That's worth reading too. And finally, in the end, the police did it. You can see in the video at the end of it, the police did do something after all these attacks on them, on the police and on other Dutch citizens. The police did do something. The hooligans were forced onto a bus and presumably back to their hotel. And the mayor of Amsterdam did announce this week that 10 Israelis were arrested, as well as far less than the hundreds of other of Dutch people that have been arrested, including, it seems, at least one night raid of a Dutch citizen, reportedly of Palestinian descent, arrested in his home. It seems to have happened. It seems likely these 10 Israelis were arrested. It's unclear what happened to them. It seems likely they're already back. They've probably been sent back to Israel, but there's no word on that yet.
What was the response of the Dutch politicians to this outbreak of Israeli violence in their capital city?
Yeah, the political and media response to the Israeli rampage has been to invert reality and to blame the victims. And it hasn't only been in Holland. It's been the entire Western political and media class. And the theme is by now predictable. It's fabricating and weaponizing anti-Semitism. It's the same thing. US President Joe Biden claimed, without evidence, that there had been, quote, anti-Semitic attacks on Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam. And he hinted that events were akin to Nazi Germany. Dutch and other Western politicians had followed suit. The far-right Dutch politician Geert Wilders claimed there had been, quote, a pogrom on the streets of Amsterdam against Jews, and that, quote, we have become the Gaza of Europe. You can see that in his post here. Yeah. It's important to note that Wilders is not just some fringe lunatic, although it would certainly be accurate to describe him as a fascist and as a Zionist. His party actually won the elections in Holland earlier this year, although they didn't make him prime minister, presumably because he would be too embarrassing to the Dutch political elite. Moin Rabani talks more about that in some of the threads that he's been posting to X. Wilders was essentially made the kingmaker in the coalition negotiations for the formation of the new government. Now, Wilders wants to deport Dutch citizens of Arab and Muslim origins. You know, he's one of the world's leading Islamophobes and is incredibly pro-Israel. So, due to that desire to deport these Dutch citizens of Arab origins, that's what he means about becoming the Gaza of Europe. Here in Britain, the Foreign Minister David Lammy said that he stood with Israelis, and again, without evidence, he claimed there had been, quote, anti-Semitic attacks on Israelis in Amsterdam. There was also a highly coordinated series of similar condemnations by pretty much the entire pro-Israel lobby in Britain. The Labour lawmaker Sarah Sackman, who until recently was a key leader in the Jewish labour movement, which has close ties to the Israeli embassy, also condemned the supposedly anti-Semitic attacks. I don't know if you've got that tweet, Tamara. Thank you. Even worse, she hinted, you can see here in her post, she's saying the same thing. There were several, very similar posts by the Board of Deputies of British Jews, other pro-Israel organisations in Britain and around the world, around the Western world. So even worse, you can see from Sackman's tweets here, she's trying to hint that similar events could happen in Britain, events that as she perceives them or is trying to misperceive them. And she tries to fearmonger against a recent Palestine solidarity protest that took place against an Israeli event in North London. That's what she means by the incidents across North London in the last few weeks. This is particularly worrying for campaigners because Sarah Sackman is now the deputy to Britain's chief prosecutor, Richard Herman. So she has some very serious political influence on policing in this country.
Yeah, and as you know intimately, the police have been ordered, I guess, to harass, take equipment from, and sometimes arrest and detain journalists and activists who are, vocal about Palestinian rights. So this seems like a perfect, way to maybe expand those policies.
It seems like the perfect pretext to do so. Yeah,
right. And the media once again plays along. Asa, what can you say about how this was portrayed in the media? I mean, it was just like, I don't know. We shouldn't be surprised about anything these days, but it was particularly insipid how it was covered.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that the way I would put it is that the mainstream media reaction has been as shocking as it has been predictable. We don't have time to debunk everything, and who wants to debunk everything anyway? You could suffice it to say that it has been a total pack of lies, essentially. We can mention perhaps the most egregious example of this, which was the deletion of this video report by Sky News. I saved it and I reposted it to my X account. Several other people made copies as well. There was a massive interest in this. My post on it got 2.3 million views, I think, the video. And this video, the original version of this video, was actually fairly good, but it was deleted pretty quickly. And initially, they deleted it without any explanation until there was a massive backlash online to this deletion on social media, and Sky was basically forced into reposting the video, but in an edited version, which put a whole new spin on events and added a sympathetic interview with a racist Israeli football hooligan who claimed, again without evidence, to have been attacked. I don't have time to get into it, but I did verify that this particular fan is a racist Israeli football hooligan. The original version of the video concluded factually by stating that Dutch and Israeli leaders had condemned it as a pogrom against Jews, and while failing to address the violence by Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters. So the Sky video was actually calling out that, not calling out, but reporting on that inconsistency by the political leaders. But the new version of the video removed the latter comment and sort of, that they'd failed to address the Maccabi violence, sort of seeming to imply that the political leaders were correct. The original version of the video actually includes an extract of you can see it here, of Annette de Graaf's video of the hooligans' violent attack after the match, alongside the Sky journalist, whose name is Alice Porter, commenting that, quote, Maccabi fans were seen attacking locals as a police car can be seen driving by. But in the new censored version, the reposted version of the Sky News video, they changed this commentary significantly so the attackers are no longer identified, the hint, of course, being that they may have been the pro-Palestinians. But de Graaf herself has now complained to several international news organizations that have misused their video, often without permission, to invert reality and to falsely claim it showed an anti-Semitic attack, even though it was clearly the hooligans. We have a tweet of thank you, Tamara. You can see here the German newspaper Bild, I think you say it, even used a still from the video to claim that it showed, quote, an Arab mob on. You can't quite see it in the subhead, but it's what it says is an Arab mob was on the hunt for Jews that night, completely inverting reality.
Oh my God.
Shocking stuff.
It's shocking and not surprising, and the level of gaslighting that we've seen, particularly when it comes to portraying Israel and Israelis as the eternal and only victims. The scale of this gaslighting has just been unprecedented, and Yeah, thanks, Asa, for that panoramic view of what happened. And it's just really important to remain vigilant, especially as anti-Jewish bigotry is weaponized in order to provide cover for Israel's genocide in Gaza. So keep us up to date on this story, of course. And thanks, Asa.
Yeah, weaponized anti-Semitism is a story that doesn't go away, unfortunately.
No, and it keeps being fed by the the politicians and the corporate media who are invested in providing cover diplomatically, politically, financially for Israel's genocide. So thank you so much. Well, let's bring John and Ali back on. Hi. We just have a few minutes, but I know we wanted to ask a specific question there. Yeah.
Well, I can I comment on what Asa just presented, because I thought fantastic job, Asa. This thing has been driving me crazy for a week, and I just haven't had the time to delve into it the way you did, and I think that would be very helpful for a lot of people. But just a couple of things that reminds me of. I mean, we've covered, of course, and debunked the October 7th lies about mass rapes, about burned babies, about the Hannibal Doctrine. And even though the scale of this is different, it's all the same media, Western media and Western government propaganda. But what they've done now is extend this to, Israeli football hooligans in Amsterdam. And the political effect of that is important to think about. You mentioned it in the UK, that this could presage an even sharper crackdown by the Labour government there, which is already, fully involved in this genocide and cracking down on anyone who speaks up. But in the Netherlands, we now see calls for the expulsion of so-called Moroccans, meaning Dutch citizens who may have, Moroccan or other immigrant former colonial ancestry. And so it's going to be weaponized for far more than, just to say, oh, Israel is the victim. Of course, that's part of it, but it's also about further radicalizing the West into this, march towards fascism, which it's been on for a while, and of which Donald Trump is a symptom, not a cause. I think that's really important to point out. The other thing, just on a personal note, when I was banned from entering Germany and banned from even speaking to Germans by Zoom from the United States, supposedly, I did it anyway, of course, it was because, according to the German authorities, my presence in Germany could cause public disorder and rioting in the streets, and disorder between Jewish and other communities, Arab and Palestinian communities in the streets of Germany. And the similar ban was imposed back in April on Dr. Ghassan Abu Sittah, the British Palestinian surgeon who spent the first 43 days of this genocide treating people in Gaza. And then when he was, after the Germans imposed that ban, he was banned from entering the Netherlands. So this is really important to note, that they are using, this civil disorder, this rioting, this thuggery by these genocidal Israeli fanatics was the most easy thing to predict. If there was any public order justification to ban an event, it would have been this football match. But instead, they use that public order pretext as a form of censorship while facilitating and protecting genocidal fanatic rioters on the streets of Europe. And we don't know, of course, but I'm certain it's very likely many of these genocidal thugs rampaging through Amsterdam, calling for the murder of more Palestinian children and celebrating murder and death, were probably just a short time ago perpetrating the acts of genocide that they were celebrating in the streets of Amsterdam.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that, because these are mostly, young men, of military age, as it were. Although in the Bender video, there's some of them seem to have been, at least two of them seem to have been very young teenagers as well. A couple more things to say about this. Ali, you mentioned on the case for for this to be banned. The mayor of Amsterdam just put out, I didn't really have the space to get into it, but the mayor of Amsterdam just put out a 12-page report of what happened. It's also released in English as well as Dutch, and I did read the whole thing. It was quite interesting. There was, she fuels the whole nonsense narrative, but at one point in it, you can see how the lack of seriousness of protecting their Dutch citizens of, the so-called Moroccans, Dutch citizens of migrant heritage. She says they considered whether or not to ban the event, but she called authorities in Tel Aviv, and they said they don't have the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans don't have any reputation for being violent. Well, they don't have any reputation for being violent against other Israeli Jews, as far as I know. But it's the issue of away games that is the issue. That they are when Israeli football hooligans are overseas, they have a tendency to be violent because they're seeing it as part of their sort of global persecution, I suppose.
Cultural diplomacy.
Yeah.
Well, there's a long history. I don't know if this applies specifically to Maccabi Tel Aviv. It may well. I don't know. But there is a long history of Israeli football fans forming racist mobs and attacking Palestinians.
I mean, look at Beitar.
Tel Aviv, not just in Jerusalem. Beitar Jerusalem is one, but these attacks have happened in Tel Aviv and all over the country. So it was easily predictable. It was easily predictable.
Yeah, the last thing I want to mention is, there's been a lot of speculation online about how the hooligans had Mossad agents amongst them and so forth. So Tamara, if you could put the Jerusalem Post story online, on the screen. There was this story 2 days before the match in the Jerusalem Post, and it says in it, it's a bit murky. To me, it's a little bit murky, but it does report definitively, quote, as with all Israeli teams playing in Europe over the last year, going to an away game in Europe, security concerns are paramount. On Tuesday, Dutch newspaper De Telegraaf reported that in addition to Maccabi's regular security personnel, Mossad agents will join the team in Amsterdam to provide maximum protection. So, they said that would happen ahead of time. We don't know if it definitely happened. We don't know if there were Mossad agents amongst them or not. We can't rule it out that, it happened. Something that is kind of interesting in the Bender video, again, he doesn't seem to have a particular axe to grind, but this teenager notices there were a couple of points where he says, "Oh, the hooligans are the fans, whatever he calls them, the hooligans are having they're having a sort of planning meeting now, and there's a leader." So, there was two particular points in the video where he notices kind of ringleaders amongst the hooligans. So, that does imply that there was somebody amongst the Israelis. There seems to have been some people directing events. Whether that was other hooligans or some kind of Mossad agent, I don't know. It's hard to say. But, it wasn't purely spontaneous. It doesn't seem to have been in any case.
And just while you were giving that, I looked this up, Asa. Tamara, are you able to put up the article I just dropped in the chat? This is an article I wrote for the Electronic Intifada in 2013. And the headline is, as Israeli football season opens, violent racist attacks on Palestinians return too. And Here's just here's just two sentences from it. The New Israel Fund, a liberal Zionist charity which monitors and campaigns against racism in football stadiums, said in a recent report that there had been, quote, progress in some areas of fighting football racism, but said that Beitar Jerusalem and Maccabi Tel Aviv fans are still responsible for most incidents. There were 38 episodes of incitement against minorities this year, including 18 at Maccabi Tel Aviv and 15 at Beitar Jerusalem, according to the report. So that was in 2013, and Beitar Jerusalem, which has the reputation for being the most racist Israeli football club, was actually responsible for less racist incidents than Maccabi Tel Aviv. So, I mean, it's just the lying is off the charts.
Yeah, very interesting.
God, well, let's watch this story very closely and see what happens. Let's wrap. I mean, we've gone 3.5 hours. Thank you to everyone who stayed with us. We had a lot to pack in today, especially since we were off last week. So thank you for staying with us. Of course, we're gonna turn every one of these segments into their own individual video. So if you didn't get a chance to watch the whole 3.5 hour Lord of the Rings episode, they will be up on our YouTube shortly.
As is this whole live stream can be rewatched at any time. We don't take it down. We don't take it down. YouTube may we will hope they won't, but we won't take it down.
No. Please go to electronicintifada.net. Take a look at our remarkable new features that we have from some of the bravest people on the planet in Gaza, enduring just unimaginable everything, minute to minute, in Gaza, and they're bringing us these stories that you can't read anywhere else, as well as analysis and political developments by our staff writers under the blog section. Please donate to keep this publication running and keep paying our Gaza writers and everyone who works behind the scenes on this program, and everyone at EI. I want to specifically thank Tamara Nassar for producing and directing today's live stream, as she always does. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you to Eli Gerzon for social media. Thank you to Michael Brown for fact-checking. Thank you, Ali, John, Asa, and I'll thank myself. And we will see you next week. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, Nora, and everyone.
Thanks, Nora.